What if one of America's most famous prison escapes wasn't just an escape? What if it was the beginning of something far more shocking? It's a question that has lingered in the minds of millions since the night of June 11, 1962, when three prisoners made a daring escape from the notorious Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, the island prison situated in the cold, turbulent waters of San Francisco Bay. The escape was audacious, meticulous, and executed with the kind of precision that left authorities scratching their heads. But what happened next? Where did they go? Were they ever truly free? And, most chilling of all, were they even alive? The story of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, has been one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American criminal history. For years, people have wondered what happened to these three men who slipped away from a maximum security prison and disappeared without a trace. After over 60 years of investigation, theory, and speculation, no one truly knows what became of them. But here's the most shocking thing: what if we're closer than ever to finally uncovering the truth? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? This question echoes in the minds of viewers, as the story unfolds, pulling them into a mystery that has captivated the world for over half a century. Alcatraz wasn't just any prison. Situated on an isolated island, it was designed to house the most dangerous criminals in the United States. Its walls, its bars, its guards, everything about Alcatraz screamed, escape is impossible. The men who landed here were the worst of the worst, mobsters, killers, and those who had proved impossible to control in other prisons. And yet, somehow, three men. One a seasoned career criminal, the others just as desperate, pulled off what was supposed to be an impossible feat: they escaped. But escaping Alcatraz was no small task. The prison was built on a rocky outcrop surrounded by waters that were freezing, rough, and known for their strong currents. Every escape attempt was met with failure, with many inmates drowning or being recaptured within hours. So when Frank Morris, along with the Anglin brothers, made their move in the summer of 1962, it seemed almost laughable that they had any real chance of success. The plan was elaborate, sophisticated, and, quite frankly, astonishing. Over the span of months, the three men meticulously carved out the grates in their cells, fashioned dummies out of papier-mâché, and built makeshift rafts from raincoats. All of this, while under the constant watch of guards, within the walls of one of the most tightly secured prisons in the world. In a sense, their escape was both a work of criminal genius and a desperate cry for freedom. On the night of June 11, 1962, after months of preparation, the three men put their plan into action. They created dummies of themselves, carefully placed them in their cells, and crawled through holes they had painstakingly carved in the walls. From there, they made their way through the prison's network of pipes and vents, finally reaching the roof of the prison. In a daring move, they descended into the bay below, using a makeshift raft to escape to freedom, or so they hoped. The escape was discovered the next morning when guards found the dummies lying in the prisoners' beds, the men gone without a trace. Panic spread quickly, but even as search efforts were launched, there was no sign of the men in the waters. No bodies. No footprints. Nothing. Over the years, authorities have claimed that the escapees likely drowned in the freezing waters of the bay, carried away by the powerful tides. They pointed to the difficulty of surviving such an escape, particularly considering the dangers of the water, the distance they would have had to travel, and the lack of resources. But there was something about this escape that didn't sit right with people. Witnesses who lived near the bay reported seeing nothing suspicious. Others claimed to have heard odd sounds the night of the escape, though nothing conclusive could be determined. Even more intriguing was the lack of physical evidence. There were no bodies recovered. No personal items found in the water. No definitive proof that they had perished. Soon, rumors began to swirl. Did they survive? Were they caught later? Did they make it out of the United States and disappear somewhere in the world, living out their lives in quiet obscurity? Or were they lost forever, victims of the harsh elements of the bay? the authorities didn't give up. They launched an exhaustive search, enlisting the help of the U.S. Coast Guard, divers, and even using new forensic methods to comb the waters. But the more they searched, the more questions arose. No concrete evidence was ever found. The FBI eventually closed the case, declaring the escapees dead, but the public refused to let the mystery die. Theories abound to this day. Some believe the escapees met an untimely death in the waters of the bay, their bodies swept away in the currents. Others insist they made it to the mainland, either aided by accomplices or by sheer luck. And there are those who argue that they could have easily hidden out in plain sight, with the right skills and the right contacts, living in secret for decades. But the most chilling possibility? That after all these years, the escapees could still be alive, living under false identities, perhaps even in places no one would ever think to look. After all, they were criminals, yes, but also survivors, men who had shown a remarkable ability to think outside the box, to manipulate the system, and to evade capture. Could they have truly escaped and built new lives, hiding in plain sight for more than 60 years? For years, investigators have pored over old evidence, re-examining the case with the benefit of modern technology. Yet, despite their best efforts, no breakthrough has been made. The case remains cold. The question lingers, what happened to the Alcatraz escapees? And so, the legend continues to grow. The men who escaped Alcatraz have become more than just fugitives, they've become symbols of defiance, of hope, and of the ultimate mystery. Their escape was more than a physical act of breaking free. It was a statement of human will against impossible odds. This story is far from over, though. Every year, new theories emerge, new evidence comes to light, and new people claim to know the truth. Some have even suggested that the truth may still be closer than we think. Could we finally be on the verge of discovering what really happened to the Alcatraz escapees? The three men who disappeared from Alcatraz that fateful night in June 1962 were no ordinary criminals. Each had a history that spoke of hardship, rebellion, and desperation. Frank Morris, a man with a reputation for being both intelligent and dangerous, John Anglin, the quieter of the two brothers, and Clarence Anglin, the more daring and bold, all shared a common thread: they were driven by the need to escape not just Alcatraz, but a lifetime of imprisonment and the darkness of their pasts. Frank Morris was the one who, more than anyone, gave the escape its heart. A seasoned criminal with a brilliant mind, Frank had been in and out of prison since he was a teenager. Born in 1926 in Washington, D.C., Morris was an intelligent and cunning man who often used his wits to manipulate those around him. His life of crime began early. He was convicted of various offenses, including armed robbery and narcotics charges. But it was his time in federal prisons that shaped him into the man who would eventually mastermind the escape from Alcatraz. Morris had spent years bouncing between different institutions, often escaping from one only to be caught and sent back. His knack for escape became legendary. When he was transferred to Alcatraz in 1960, he had already escaped from other facilities several times. Alcatraz, however, was different. It was meant to be the prison that no one could escape from. Still, Morris wasn't intimidated. Instead, he saw it as another challenge. He spent his days studying the prison's layout, watching the guards, and getting to know the routines of the facility. It was this attention to detail, combined with his natural intelligence, that would later prove vital to his plan. Morris was known for being a loner. His cool demeanor and ability to remain calm in tense situations made him stand out even in a place like Alcatraz, where everyone was on edge. He was also a man of patience, willing to bide his time for the right moment to strike. Over the years, he had plotted numerous escapes, but the chance at freedom from Alcatraz was an opportunity he couldn't let slip away. John and Clarence Anglin, born in the small town of Donaldsonville, Georgia, were no strangers to trouble. The two brothers, close in age and temperament, had a history of running from the law. They were both convicted of a string of robberies and had served time in several different prisons before they found themselves in Alcatraz. Their time there, however, was marked by a strong sense of camaraderie and a mutual desire to break free. John, the older of the two, was known for being quick-witted and resourceful. He was a natural leader who often took charge in tough situations. His brother Clarence, on the other hand, was more impulsive and fearless. He had a rebellious streak that sometimes led him into trouble, but it also made him the perfect partner for an escape attempt. Together, the Anglin brothers formed an unbreakable bond, one that would prove crucial in their quest for freedom. When the brothers arrived at Alcatraz in 1961, they quickly realized that their lives were about to get even harder. Alcatraz was filled with dangerous men, and the conditions were brutal. But despite the prison's reputation for being inescapable, the Anglin brothers didn't give up hope. Like Morris, they began to form a plan. They knew they couldn't do it alone. They would need the help of someone with the intelligence and skills to pull off such a daring escape. It was no surprise that they turned to Frank Morris. The bond between the three men was more than just one of necessity, it was one of shared experiences and mutual respect. They had all seen the inside of multiple prisons and understood the risks involved in making an escape attempt. But there was something else that connected them, the burning desire for freedom. For Frank Morris, John, and Clarence Anglin, the escape from Alcatraz wasn't just about escaping a prison, it was about reclaiming their lives. The men spent months together, planning their escape down to the finest detail. They started by carefully studying the structure of their cells. Frank Morris, using his intelligence and experience, figured out a way to create a hole in the walls of their cells without being detected. With tools smuggled in or crafted from everyday items, Morris, with the help of the Anglin brothers, chipped away at the cement walls separating their cells from the utility corridors behind them. But the escape didn't end with simply getting out of their cells. They knew the real challenge lay beyond the walls of Alcatraz. The trio had to navigate through a maze of prison passages, over the rooftop, and then out to the cold, unforgiving waters of the San Francisco Bay. Once they made it outside, they would be exposed to the dangers of the water and the risk of being caught or drowned. The men also faced the challenge of hiding the holes they had created in their cells. They used papier-mâché dummies, which they dressed in their own clothes, to fool the guards into thinking they were asleep in their beds. The level of detail was staggering. The dummies even had faces sculpted out of soap and human hair, making them almost lifelike. The escape was set for the night of June 11, 1962. By then, the men had spent months perfecting their plan. They had fashioned makeshift rafts out of old raincoats, carefully stashed away in the prison's utility corridors. They had also made sure to keep a low profile, avoiding any actions that might draw attention to themselves. The timing of the escape was crucial. It had to be executed flawlessly, or it would all be for nothing. On the night of the escape, everything seemed to fall into place. The men had planned every step with military precision, and now they were ready. With their dummies in place, they began their journey through the dark, silent corridors of the prison. The sense of urgency was palpable as they made their way to the rooftop. Every step was calculated, every noise minimized, as they navigated the jagged and unfamiliar terrain of the prison. Once they reached the roof, the men faced their final challenge, crossing the prison's high walls and making their way down to the water's edge. They had no idea what awaited them out there. The waters of the bay were freezing, the currents fierce, and the coastline miles away. But despite the odds, the men made it down to the water, launched their makeshift rafts, and set out into the night. At that moment, they were free. The men had done the impossible. They had escaped Alcatraz. But what happened after that? Did they make it? Were they caught? Or did they simply vanish, as so many people believed? As the investigation would later reveal, no one truly knew. But the escape itself, the daring, the brilliance, and the audacity, would leave an indelible mark on history. The night of June 11, 1962, was like any other at Alcatraz. The winds whipped across the island, the fog rolled in from the bay, and the guards walked their usual rounds, believing everything was under control. But behind the walls of the maximum security prison, something extraordinary was about to unfold. In the dead of night, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, took the first step of their audacious escape plan, an escape that would go down in history as one of the most daring, and most puzzling, in the world. The quiet of the island was shattered only by the sound of the waves crashing against the rocky shore. Inside the prison, most of the inmates were asleep in their cells, oblivious to what was about to unfold. But in one corner of the prison, the air was thick with anticipation. The escape was underway. Months of preparation had led to this night. Every detail of the escape had been planned with military precision. Frank Morris, the mastermind behind the operation, had ensured that every step would go as smoothly as possible. The men had spent countless hours in their cells, carving out holes in the walls with makeshift tools, shanks, spoons, even the edge of their metal beds. They had painstakingly covered their work with paper and fabric to avoid detection by the ever-watchful guards. Each man had a role to play. Frank Morris had been the brains behind the escape, coordinating every move and every decision. The Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, provided the muscle and the courage to pull it off. They had spent months in secret, designing the dummies that would stand in for them in their cells, creating rafts out of old raincoats, and memorizing every inch of the prison's layout. The escape was their only chance at freedom, and they knew they had to get it right. The night of the escape began like any other. The men had spent the day quietly working on their preparations, gathering the final supplies needed for their escape. By the time the guards made their last rounds, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers were ready. They had carefully positioned their papier-mâché dummies in their beds, making sure they looked as lifelike as possible. The dummies were made from a combination of old clothes, newspaper, and even hair that the men had collected. The faces of the dummies were sculpted from soap, with hair sewn into the heads to make them look real. The guards made their final rounds, shining their flashlights into the cells. They glanced over the dummies, making sure everything seemed in order. They saw nothing suspicious. The men were still inside their cells, as far as they could tell. But in reality, the escapees had already slipped through the holes they had carved in the walls. The escape route took them through the cramped, dark corridors behind the cells, and through a series of ventilation ducts that led to the roof. They had carefully studied the prison's blueprint, memorizing every turn, every possible obstacle. It was their only way out. Once on the roof, the men faced their most difficult challenge, scaling the high prison walls to reach the outer perimeter. Alcatraz was designed to be an inescapable fortress, with towering walls that seemed impossible to climb. But the escapees were resourceful. They used the materials they had gathered over the past few months, a rope made from bed sheets, a network of pipes, and their own strength. The men made their way to the edge of the roof, where they faced the daunting drop to the ground below. The prison walls were lined with razor wire, and the guards patrolled the perimeter regularly. But in that moment, the men were as close to freedom as they would ever be. They knew they had only one shot at this. They descended carefully, using the ropes and pipes to navigate the dangerous drop. The sound of their movements was drowned out by the noise of the wind and the waves crashing against the rocks below. For the first time in years, they felt a sense of hope, a fleeting moment when they realized they might actually make it. With their feet on solid ground, the men made their way to the water's edge. There, hidden from view, they had stashed their most important piece of equipment, a makeshift raft constructed from old raincoats, bound together with rope. They had spent weeks carefully piecing it together, ensuring that it would be sturdy enough to hold their weight as they made their way across the cold, treacherous waters of San Francisco Bay. The bay, with its icy waters and strong currents, was one of the most dangerous parts of their plan. The men knew that if they were caught in the current, or if their raft failed, they would be doomed. But there was no turning back. This was their chance. With the raft in hand, the men climbed into the cold water, their hearts racing. The darkness of the night provided them with some cover, but the dangers of the bay were ever present. As they pushed the raft into the water, they could hear the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks and feel the pull of the currents beneath them. This was their final test. if they could make it across the bay, they would be free. The raft drifted slowly away from the shore, carrying the men toward the mainland. For a brief moment, it seemed like they might succeed. But the journey was far from over. The men had no way of knowing what awaited them on the other side. Would they be able to find shelter? Would they be caught by the authorities? Or would they vanish into the night, free at last? By morning, the prison was in a state of panic. Guards discovered the dummies in the prisoners' cells, and the alarm was immediately raised. The prison went into lockdown, and search parties were dispatched to comb the area. The authorities, including the FBI, launched a massive manhunt. They searched the waters of the bay, looking for any sign of the escapees. But despite their best efforts, no bodies were found. No trace of the men was discovered. The escape had been so well planned that, for the first time in the history of Alcatraz, it seemed as though the men had truly disappeared. The authorities were baffled. How could they have made it past the guards, the walls, the bay? And if they did escape, where had they gone? For weeks, the search continued, but no concrete evidence emerged. The men were gone, leaving only questions in their wake. The news of the daring escape spread like wildfire. By morning, the entire country was buzzing with the mystery of the three men who had vanished from the supposedly inescapable Alcatraz. The authorities scrambled to piece together what had happened, but the escapees were already far ahead, their whereabouts unknown. What was once thought to be an impenetrable fortress had been breached, and now the search for Frank Morris, John, and Clarence Anglin began in earnest. The escape from Alcatraz was no ordinary prison break. Alcatraz was known for its isolation, its dangerous waters, and its high walls. If anyone could escape, it was believed to be a feat of such skill and audacity that it would be nearly impossible for the men to evade capture for long. But no one had prepared for this, 3 inmates slipping through the cracks of the system and disappearing without a trace. The authorities initially thought they had a good chance of finding the men. The Bay Area was their first focus. The cold waters of the San Francisco Bay, along with the powerful currents, were dangerous for anyone unprepared. Surely, if the escapees had made it across the water, they would have left behind some evidence. But when the search team scoured the bay, looking for clues, boats, rafts, or any sign of a struggle, they found nothing. The waters remained eerily calm, and the men's raft was nowhere to be found. Within hours of the escape's discovery, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, was called in. Alcatraz was a federal prison, and the escapees were dangerous criminals with long histories of violent behavior. The FBI set up a task force to track down the men and bring them back to custody, dead or alive. They launched a nationwide manhunt, interviewing anyone who might have had contact with Frank Morris or the Anglin brothers. The FBI's investigation quickly revealed some surprising details. Morris, known for his cunning and intelligence, had been the mastermind of the escape. He had carefully orchestrated every step of the plan. But the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, had been vital to the success of the operation. Together, the 3 men had created an escape plan that had been executed flawlessly, until now. But without concrete evidence of where they went or how they made it across the bay, the authorities were left in the dark. The FBI launched an investigation into the men's past, hoping to find some connection or lead that would provide answers. The men had all been involved in various criminal activities prior to their incarceration at Alcatraz, and it was possible that someone, somewhere, knew where they had gone. Despite the FBI's exhaustive efforts, there were no immediate leads. The men had disappeared, and there was no sign of their whereabouts. But as the days passed, a new lead emerged. The authorities began to consider the possibility that the escapees had made it to the mainland and found refuge somewhere in the Bay Area. The theory was that the men, with their knowledge of the area and their ability to blend in, could have easily sought shelter among the population. The search area expanded to the city of San Francisco, where the authorities focused on locating any possible hiding places or people who may have helped the men after they escaped. The men were likely to rely on old criminal contacts or acquaintances, possibly even relatives, to assist in their getaway. At the same time, law enforcement began to investigate the possibility that the escapees might have received outside help. Did someone on the outside aid them in their escape? Did they have a network of supporters waiting for them on the other side of the bay? These questions lingered in the minds of the investigators as they searched for any trace of the men. The FBI's manhunt for the Alcatraz escapees intensified. They posted pictures of Frank Morris, John, and Clarence Anglin, urging the public to come forward with any information. They even offered a reward for any tips leading to their capture. Newspapers across the country ran stories about the escape, and the men's faces became familiar to the public. The authorities hoped that someone, somewhere, might have seen something or heard something that could help solve the mystery. Meanwhile, the men's families were thrust into the spotlight. The Anglin brothers, in particular, were from a small town in Georgia, and their relatives were interviewed by the press. Many believed that the Anglins might have returned home or sought refuge with relatives. However, the families were adamant that they hadn't heard from the men, and no one could provide a solid lead on where they might be. As the days turned into weeks, the theories about what had happened to the escapees began to multiply. Some believed that the men had drowned in the frigid waters of the San Francisco Bay. The currents in the bay were strong, and the water temperature was dangerously low. Others speculated that they might have made it to the mainland, but were quickly caught by the authorities. Still, others argued that the men could have found a way to escape into the wilderness and disappeared forever. One of the most popular theories was that the escapees had successfully made it to the mainland, but had then gone into hiding. They had escaped one of the most secure prisons in the world, and now they were living among the population, evading capture by staying under the radar. Some believed that the men had assumed new identities, using fake papers and documents to blend in with society. Others speculated that they had received help from outside forces, such as underground networks or criminal associates. As the months passed, the search slowed. The authorities had no leads, and the trail of the escapees grew colder. But the mystery of the Alcatraz escape was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Though the men had seemingly vanished without a trace, the FBI would continue to follow any possible lead, no matter how small. The case remained open, and the question on everyone's mind was the same: what happened to Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers? Were they still alive? Had they escaped to freedom, or had they perished in the cold waters of the bay? As time passed, the urgency of the search began to fade. Despite ongoing efforts by law enforcement, no new information surfaced. The case went cold, and the men who had once been notorious escapees were slowly forgotten. Alcatraz, once the site of their daring escape, became a museum, and the prison itself was shut down in 1963, just 1 year after the escape. The mystery, however, would not die. In the years that followed, rumors persisted. Some believed the men had escaped to Mexico, while others thought they might have made their way to South America or even Europe. But without concrete evidence, the truth remained elusive. In 1979, the FBI officially closed the case, declaring the escape unsolved. However, they continued to collect tips and leads, keeping the possibility of new information alive. To this day, the question of what happened to the Alcatraz escapees remains one of the most enduring mysteries in criminal history. As the months turned into years, the fate of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers remained an unsolved mystery. The FBI had combed through every lead, interviewed hundreds of people, and investigated every possible escape route. Yet, the three men seemed to have vanished without a trace. As the investigation slowed down, the case began to evolve from an intense manhunt to one of the most enduring mysteries in American criminal history. With no conclusive evidence, the theories about what happened to the escapees began to take on lives of their own. One of the most commonly accepted theories was that the three men had drowned in the cold, fast-moving waters of the San Francisco Bay. The escape route from Alcatraz to the mainland was treacherous, with icy temperatures, strong currents, and jagged rocks. Even the most skilled swimmers would have found the journey perilous, and the raft the men had crafted was far from sturdy. In fact, the raft had been constructed out of old raincoats and tied together with makeshift rope. It was hardly the kind of vessel that could withstand the harsh conditions of the bay. Many believed that the men had set out on their raft, only to succumb to the waters of the bay. The strong currents, combined with the freezing temperatures, could easily have capsized the raft, leaving the men to drown before they ever had a chance to make it to the mainland. Some speculated that the men could have been caught by the currents and swept out to sea, their bodies never recovered. In the days and weeks following the escape, the FBI combed the bay for any sign of the men's bodies, but nothing was found. No remains were ever discovered in the water, and no one came forward claiming to have seen the escapees' bodies. As the years passed, the theory that the men had drowned began to lose credibility. If they had died in the bay, it seemed unlikely that there would have been no trace left behind. Another prominent theory was that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers had received help from the outside, either from people they knew or from criminal associates who had been waiting for them. This theory gained traction after the FBI found out that the Anglin brothers had family members who lived in Florida and Georgia. It was possible, investigators thought, that they had arranged for someone to meet them after they made it to the mainland. The fact that the men had managed to escape Alcatraz, one of the most secure prisons in the world, implied that they had access to resources and knowledge that went beyond the average inmate. Some believed that the escapees could have received aid from relatives or criminal contacts in the area, who had helped them disappear into the Bay Area or beyond. The Anglins, in particular, had been involved in a variety of criminal activities before their imprisonment, and it was not outside the realm of possibility that they had established connections with people who could assist them in their escape. The FBI even investigated the possibility that the escapees had been assisted by prison guards or prison employees, although no evidence of this emerged. The idea that they had somehow coordinated their escape with the help of outsiders remained a constant theory, though it was never proven. One of the most intriguing and persistent theories was that the escapees had made it to the mainland, but instead of hiding in the shadows, they had lived out their lives in plain sight. This theory suggested that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers had assumed new identities, possibly with the help of criminal contacts, and had blended into the population. The idea that they might have started new lives, free from the constraints of their pasts, was appealing to many. After all, the three men had spent years living in the isolated, unforgiving environment of Alcatraz. The freedom of the mainland must have been an irresistible temptation. Perhaps they had made it to the mainland and disappeared into the hustle and bustle of cities like San Francisco or even further afield, in places where their old criminal backgrounds wouldn't attract attention. Some believed that the men had gotten plastic surgery to change their appearances, or that they had assumed new names and moved to different parts of the country. It was speculated that they could have started new lives as ordinary citizens, perhaps even finding legitimate work or starting families. The theory that they lived out their days as free men, hiding in plain sight, captivated the public's imagination. According to the living in plain sight theory, one of the possible destinations for the escapees was Florida, where the Anglin brothers had relatives. In particular, John and Clarence's sister, who lived in Florida, was a potential connection that could have provided the brothers with a way to disappear. Other investigators considered the possibility that the men might have gone to other states, perhaps even out of the country, using false identities to avoid detection. Another possibility was that the escapees may have made their way to Mexico, where they could blend in more easily and find a place to hide. Mexico's vast, unregulated regions would have provided an ideal location for fugitives trying to escape the long arm of the law. The theory that the men had traveled south of the border became popular in the years following the escape, though no solid evidence ever surfaced to support it. Some believed the men might have sought refuge with other criminal organizations, perhaps working as mercenaries or as part of organized crime. This would explain why no one ever came forward with any useful information. These men were hiding in places where they were known only to those who had the means and the will to protect them. A darker theory, often cited by those who believed the men would never have survived, suggested that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers had been murdered shortly after their escape. This theory implied that the escapees had made it to the mainland, but had been captured by someone, perhaps a criminal or even a bounty hunter, and murdered before they could go any further. Supporters of this theory pointed to the lack of evidence in the case and suggested that the men's bodies could have been disposed of to ensure they would never be found. This theory was fueled by the fact that no bodies had ever been recovered from the bay or found anywhere else. Some even suggested that the men's escape was a suicide mission, a last-ditch effort to escape the oppressive confines of Alcatraz, but one that ultimately led to their demise. Despite the many theories and the ongoing speculation, the truth about what happened to Frank Morris, John, and Clarence Anglin remains a mystery. The authorities, despite all their efforts, were never able to conclusively determine the men's fate. No new evidence has been found in decades, and the case remains one of the most famous unsolved mysteries in American criminal history. The theories will continue to circulate, as will the possibility that the men managed to pull off one of the greatest escapes in history, and lived to tell the tale. Whether they escaped to freedom, perished in the bay, or vanished into the shadows, the mystery of what happened to the Alcatraz escapees will continue to haunt the public's imagination for years to come. Years passed, and the Alcatraz escape became little more than a footnote in criminal history. The case was closed by the FBI in 1979, but the mystery never fully dissipated. Occasionally, new leads would emerge, tips from the public, rumors, and whispers from people claiming to know something about the fate of Frank Morris, John, and Clarence Anglin. Still, with no solid evidence, the case was never reopened, and the escape remained unsolved. However, in the early 2000s, something startling happened. New evidence, perhaps just a glimmer of hope, emerged, reigniting interest in the case. In 2003, a letter surfaced in the hands of an anonymous source. The letter was purportedly written by an individual who claimed to have been close to the escapees after they disappeared. The letter described a clandestine meeting that allegedly took place between the Anglin brothers and a man from a small town in Georgia, where the escapees supposedly went into hiding. The letter described the escapees' post-escape lives in vivid detail, claiming that they lived quietly for years in the southern United States, particularly in rural areas where they could easily blend in. The author wrote that they had spent time with the Anglins, who had reportedly shared the story of their escape and how they had made it to freedom. The letter was postmarked from a small town in Georgia, and its contents were a mix of first-hand accounts and speculative commentary. While the letter couldn't be verified, its timing was intriguing. It surfaced at a time when interest in the Alcatraz escape was peaking again, thanks to renewed media coverage. The mysterious letter was seen by some as a key piece of evidence, something that could lead investigators back to the trail of the missing escapees. The letter wasn't the only new piece of evidence that emerged. In 2008, a forensic investigator working for a private research firm claimed to have uncovered significant new clues in the case. The investigator was combing through old police files and photographs when they stumbled upon a set of photos showing a seemingly ordinary shovel that had been found on the yard near the Alcatraz prison walls during the original search for the escapees. The shovel had been noted as a potential tool used in the digging process, but its significance had never been fully explored. The investigators' hypothesis was that the shovel had not been left behind by the escapees but was actually planted as part of an effort to cover their tracks. The theory suggested that the shovel had been strategically placed to mislead the authorities into thinking the escapees had stayed on the island longer than they actually did, adding another layer of complexity to the already puzzling escape. The theory surrounding the shovel was just one of many speculations that began to surface as investigators pieced together clues from the past. While the new evidence wasn't conclusive, it added a fresh layer to the mystery and gave rise to a new wave of media attention and public interest in the case. In 2013, a breakthrough came in the form of a newly discovered photograph. The photo, which was taken in the late 1960s, appeared to show two men who closely resembled Frank Morris and Clarence Anglin. The image was part of a larger collection of photos taken during the period of the escape. The photograph had been stored in an archival collection in San Francisco, and no one had noticed the striking resemblance until a historian studying the case stumbled upon it. The photograph showed two men standing near a small, nondescript building on the outskirts of a small southern town. While the quality of the photo was not high, the resemblance to the escapees was unmistakable. Some experts even claimed that the men in the photo were, in fact, the same people who had escaped from Alcatraz. The discovery of the photograph immediately reignited interest in the case. If the photograph was legitimate, it could provide crucial evidence that Frank Morris and Clarence Anglin had indeed escaped to the mainland and were living in the South, just as the letter from 2003 had suggested. Investigators began to speculate that the men might have been hiding in plain sight for decades, eluding capture by blending into a community where no one knew their true identity. In 2015, a new development stirred up controversy in the ongoing investigation. A private investigator working for a documentary team on the Alcatraz escape decided to take a bold step. They applied for a DNA test to be performed on an item that had been believed to belong to one of the escapees. The item in question was a small piece of cloth recovered from a burlap sack found in a remote area outside of the Bay Area. The sack had been discarded years earlier and had never been properly investigated. Upon closer inspection, it was found that the cloth had traces of blood, and the private investigator theorized that it could be linked to one of the escapees. DNA testing was conducted, but the results were inconclusive. The DNA sample failed to match any known individuals, including the escapees, and the results only deepened the mystery. Some critics argued that the DNA testing had been too hasty and had not been conducted under proper scientific conditions. Others pointed out that, if the test had been done properly, it might have finally provided closure to one of the greatest criminal mysteries of the 20th century. Despite the ongoing investigation and the occasional breakthroughs, the case of the Alcatraz escape remained unsolved. The public fascination with the story continued to grow, fueled by the emergence of new theories and potential evidence. People still wondered whether Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers had truly escaped to freedom, or if they had met their end in the cold waters of the San Francisco Bay. In 2016, a documentary was released that chronicled the escape and its aftermath, reigniting public interest and bringing the case back into the spotlight. The film featured interviews with former law enforcement officers, prison guards, and experts who had studied the case for years. It also included an in-depth look at the various theories surrounding the escape, providing new insights and perspectives on the mystery. For many, the question of what happened to the escapees had become more than just a criminal case. It was a symbol of the human desire for freedom, a reminder of the lengths people would go to escape a life of confinement. For others, it was a puzzle that could never be solved, a mystery that would live on in the annals of American history, always lingering just out of reach. Despite the various leads, evidence, and theories that had surfaced over the years, the truth about what happened to Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers remained elusive. As the decades passed, so too did the determination of the authorities to uncover the mystery. In the face of new theories, fresh clues, and public fascination, the case of the Alcatraz escapees refused to be put to rest. While some had resigned themselves to believing that the three men had perished, others continued the search, convinced that they were still alive. In the early 2020s, interest in the case of the Alcatraz escapees was rekindled, partly due to the surge of attention from documentaries, books, and podcasts dedicated to unsolved criminal mysteries. A renewed interest in cold cases, alongside the advancements in forensic technology, led some to believe that a fresh look at the case might reveal new answers. With this renewed interest, the FBI began to re-examine old files and revisit evidence that had been overlooked or dismissed in the past. Investigators reanalyzed reports from the 1960s and conducted further interviews with people who had been involved in the case, many of whom were still alive. They also used modern technology to comb through old crime scene photos, search for overlooked details, and reassess evidence such as the raft the escapees had built. The FBI's official stance had always been that the escapees had likely died during the escape attempt, but there were still whispers of a potential cover-up, suggesting that higher authorities had simply allowed the case to go cold. Despite their renewed efforts, however, the Bureau's investigation continued to yield no definitive answers. While new tools and techniques had proven successful in solving other cold cases, the Alcatraz escape remained frustratingly unsolvable. As the FBI renewed its investigation, private researchers, journalists, and amateur sleuths began to turn their attention to the families of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. The escapees had family members who were still alive and living in different parts of the United States, and their cooperation, or lack thereof, might provide key insights into the mystery. John and Clarence Anglin had a sister, and Frank Morris had family members who had never fully cooperated with authorities in the past. Some investigators believed that members of the families might have known more about the escapees' plans than they had ever admitted, but their loyalty to the men might have kept them from speaking out. In the early 2020s, journalists and researchers tried to locate surviving family members in the hope that they might provide information that had previously been hidden. The families were reluctant to discuss the case, but a few did share snippets of information that had never been made public. Some hinted at the possibility that the Anglin brothers and Frank Morris had indeed made it to freedom, while others pointed to the possibility of the men's eventual deaths, buried deep in the anonymity of rural America. In one particularly interesting breakthrough, Clarence Anglin's niece, who had grown up hearing family stories about the escape, came forward with a claim that she had been told by her father, Clarence's brother, that the men had indeed escaped successfully and were living out their lives in hiding. While there was no concrete proof of this, her testimony reignited the idea that the escapees had made it to safety. While the FBI was slow to take further action, several private investigators and research teams worked independently to investigate the Alcatraz escape. Over time, many turned to the island itself, organizing tours for enthusiasts, curious tourists, and conspiracy theorists. These tours, which focused on the history of the escape, delved into the most famous theories about the men's fate and examined the escape route itself. In particular, researchers continued to probe the notorious escape tunnel that had been created by Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. The hole in the wall, measured precisely by the escapees, had been carved with incredible precision, and many had been fascinated by how the men had managed to tunnel through the concrete walls unnoticed by prison guards. The escape tunnel had become an iconic symbol of their ingenuity and desperation. Over the years, experts had even tried to reconstruct the conditions in which the men had worked, hoping to determine how they pulled off the seemingly impossible feat. Through the tours, new theories began to emerge about the escape itself. Some enthusiasts suggested that the escapees had hidden in a small network of tunnels that were unknown to the prison staff, possibly even receiving help from guards or outside accomplices. Others theorized that the escapees might have built more elaborate escape routes, using the natural landscape of the island to their advantage. The story of the Alcatraz escape became a sort of underground culture, with groups of conspiracy theorists becoming obsessed with piecing together the details of the case. These individuals, some of whom had no formal background in criminology or law enforcement, dedicated their lives to uncovering what had happened to the three men. Some conspiracy theorists rejected the official narrative, that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers had died trying to escape, believing that there was a much deeper, more complex story. They often scrutinized the FBI's records, highlighting inconsistencies or overlooked details. Many argued that the federal government had known the men survived but had chosen to cover up the truth in order to preserve the reputation of Alcatraz as an escape-proof prison. Some even went so far as to claim that the escape was part of a larger conspiracy, involving not just the escapees, but potentially other individuals within the prison system. They believed the FBI had intentionally closed the case to avoid embarrassing revelations about its own failures. As more and more of these theories began to circulate, the Alcatraz escape took on a life of its own, not just as a criminal case, but as a symbol of hidden truths and untold stories. While many focused on the search for Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, it was clear that the families of the escapees had suffered over the years. For them, the uncertainty surrounding their loved ones had been an emotional burden, one that only intensified as the decades passed. John and Clarence Anglin's mother had passed away without ever knowing the fate of her sons. Frank Morris's family had also been left with unanswered questions, and the emotional toll of not knowing whether their loved ones had survived or died continued to weigh heavily on them. For many of the families, the idea that their loved ones had died in the escape attempt was a hard pill to swallow. The idea that they had escaped and lived out their lives in secret was an even more difficult concept to grasp. For some, the hope that the escapees were alive and free was the only thing that kept them from losing faith completely. As time went on, the mystery of what happened to Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers became less about the facts and more about the story itself. It became a part of American folklore, an unsolved case that sparked the imagination of millions. Theories and speculation continued to flourish, with new leads and twists emerging every year. The escape of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers was no longer just a story about criminals attempting to break free from one of the most notorious prisons in history. It was a larger-than-life mystery, one that transcended the boundaries of a criminal case and captured the hearts of anyone who ever dreamed of escaping the confines of their own limitations. But even as the search continued, it remained unclear whether the truth would ever be known. Would the escapees one day be found? Would the story finally have a conclusion, or would it remain a mystery, tantalizing us for generations to come? As the years passed, a fresh and unexpected lead emerged, one that no one could have anticipated. It came in the form of a man who claimed to have been a young boy living in the small town of Espanola, New Mexico, in the 1970s. The man, now in his late 60s, came forward with a shocking story that would stir up a whirlwind of media attention and reignite the debate about what really happened to the Alcatraz escapees. It all started when an anonymous letter arrived at a small, independent research firm based in California. The letter described a series of events that seemed to implicate a local family in the Alcatraz escapees' fate. The letter, written in the hurried, nervous handwriting of an elderly man, detailed a strange encounter he had had with two men he believed to be Frank Morris and Clarence Anglin. According to the letter, the writer, who eventually identified himself as Jerry Cole, had been a boy at the time, growing up in a remote area of Espanola. In 1972, two men had arrived at his family's home in the middle of the night, asking for help. Jerry's parents were kind but cautious, as it was unusual for strangers to come knocking on their door at such an odd hour. The two men appeared disheveled, dirty, and exhausted. They introduced themselves as John and Frank, claiming they were travelers stranded after a bad accident. Jerry's father, a well-known mechanic in the area, offered the two men a place to sleep and some food. Over the course of the next few days, the strangers spoke little, though Jerry noticed that they were careful not to reveal too much about their past. The younger of the two, Frank, had a noticeable scar on his cheek that Jerry said he could never forget. The letter continued with a claim that Jerry's mother had made an unsettling discovery. While cleaning the men's clothing, she noticed a small piece of a news article tucked into one of their shirts. The article was from the San Francisco Chronicle, and it featured a story about the escape from Alcatraz. Though the article was old, it had enough details to make it clear that the two men had indeed been on the run, likely from the infamous prison. Jerry's mother reportedly confronted the men about the newspaper clipping, and according to Jerry, their demeanor instantly changed. The two men became defensive, insisting that they were merely lost souls, trying to find their way in the world. Still, Jerry's mother never fully bought their story, and after a few days, the two men disappeared into the night without a trace. When Jerry eventually learned about the Alcatraz escape from his history classes, he could not shake the nagging feeling that the two men who had stayed with his family were, in fact, Frank Morris and Clarence Anglin. The scar on Frank's face, the strange secrecy of the two men, and the piece of newspaper, they all seemed to match the descriptions of the escapees. But Jerry, still a young boy at the time, had never connected the dots until he became an adult and started to research the escape for himself. Jerry's letter, while detailed and compelling, didn't exactly have the kind of definitive evidence investigators needed to confirm his claims. Nevertheless, the idea that two of the escapees might have lived in Espanola for a period of time seemed plausible to many who had followed the case over the years. The letter's sudden appearance caught the attention of both amateur sleuths and professional investigators, prompting them to revisit the case from an entirely new perspective. The FBI, now decades removed from its investigation, took the letter seriously enough to look into Jerry's claims. They tracked him down and conducted a thorough interview, hoping to gain more insight into his story. Jerry's recollections were consistent, though it was clear that much of his account was based on a mix of childhood memories and adult research. While he had no physical evidence to present, no photos, no fingerprints, no documents, the details in his account were enough to stir up interest in the community. Investigators combed through local records in Hispaniola, searching for any evidence that might tie Frank Morris and Clarence Anglin to the town. They found nothing, no official record, no reports of two men fitting their descriptions arriving in the area. Still, Jerry's testimony was compelling enough to warrant further investigation. There was now a growing sense that the escapees might have evaded authorities for far longer than anyone had originally thought. The most intriguing aspect of Jerry Cole's story, however, wasn't his memories of the two strangers, it was the claim that his father had noticed something strange in the weeks following the men's stay. Jerry's father, who had always been secretive about certain aspects of his work, had reportedly received an unmarked package in the mail several weeks after the men's departure. The package contained a small, rusty key and a note that simply read, Alcatraz. At first, Jerry's father had kept the key hidden, unsure of what it might mean. Over the years, he had lost track of it, but before his death in 2004, Jerry's father revealed to him that he believed the key was connected to a mysterious, unmarked grave located just outside Hispaniola. He never spoke about it in detail, but he suggested that the key could be linked to the men's escape, and possibly to their final resting place. Intrigued by his father's words, Jerry began researching the local area. In the summer of 2018, he enlisted the help of a historian and a small team of archaeologists to search for the unmarked grave his father had mentioned. The search was long and tedious, as Hispaniola, like many small towns, had been home to numerous unknown or forgotten burial sites. But in 2020, after several years of searching, the team uncovered an old grave, surrounded by stone markers that didn't seem to belong to any known family. The grave, though clearly old, was a mystery. There was no headstone, and the dirt around it seemed to have been recently disturbed. Investigators dug deeper, but there was no definitive proof to confirm that the grave contained the remains of either Frank Morris or Clarence Anglin. Still, the grave had an undeniable connection to the story, a tantalizing link to the idea that the men had lived and died in hiding, their fates forever sealed in the quiet, rural corners of America. For Jerry, the years of investigating the case had taken an emotional toll. He often questioned his own memories, wondering whether he was simply caught up in a lifelong obsession with the escape. There were moments when he doubted himself, when the weight of the case felt too heavy to bear. But there were also moments when he couldn't ignore the sense that something was unfinished, that the truth about what had happened to the Alcatraz escapees was just out of reach. His emotional journey mirrored the larger mystery itself. Just as the public had become obsessed with the Alcatraz escape, Jerry had become obsessed with finding the answers, even if it meant confronting painful memories and unknown truths about his own family. The Alcatraz escape, despite the years that had passed, remained one of the most enduring mysteries in American criminal history. The discovery of Jerry Cole's letter and the search for the unmarked grave brought new life to the case, reminding the public that sometimes, the truth is hidden in the most unexpected places. Whether or not Frank Morris and Clarence Anglin had truly made it to Hispaniola, their story continued to captivate the imaginations of those who refused to give up on finding the truth. In the end, the case remained unresolved. Jerry's story, like the case itself, raised more questions than it answered. But it also brought the world one step closer to understanding the complex, mysterious legacy of the men who had dared to escape from the most infamous prison in American history. As the search for the escapees from Alcatraz moved into its sixth decade, public interest continued to grow. With the resurfacing of Jerry Cole's startling claim and the ongoing mysteries surrounding the case, the question remained, what really happened to Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers? Did they escape to freedom, or did their lives end in tragedy? Theories continue to evolve, and in this chapter, we explore what might be the final theory that could explain the fate of the Alcatraz escapees. While some theories suggested that the men might have perished in the frigid waters surrounding Alcatraz, and others speculated that they had been buried in a hidden grave somewhere in rural America, a different idea began to take shape. A theory that combined elements of all previous speculations. This theory suggested that the escapees did not simply flee across the waters but were part of an underground network that helped them disappear. This theory, unlike the others, had a particular emphasis on outside support. It suggested that, in addition to their clever escape plan, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers had been aided by individuals who were well-connected and knowledgeable about how to keep fugitives hidden. There were rumors that a network of criminal allies, including former associates from the prison and even some who had once been in prison at Alcatraz, were operating on the outside. These individuals, it was suggested, had helped Frank and the Anglins blend into civilian life, providing them with new identities and safe havens in which they could hide from the authorities. Some of these allies had ties to organized crime, while others were simply people sympathetic to the escapees' plight. This underground network theory was further fueled by an old and previously overlooked statement made by one of Alcatraz's most notorious prisoners, who had long since been released. Before his death, he claimed that a network of escapees and those sympathetic to them existed, all working in secrecy to help those who made successful escapes from the prison. The underground network, he said, was a small but potent force working from the shadows to shield escapees from the long arm of the law. It's important to note that this theory was never fully verified by investigators, but it gained traction over the years, especially after Jerry Cole's claims. Could it be that the escapees had not just relied on their wits to break free from Alcatraz but had received critical help from well-placed people who helped them disappear into the world? The theory of an underground network was also intertwined with speculation about organized crime's possible involvement. Could Frank and the Anglins have been involved with crime syndicates before their time in prison? Some suggested that their former criminal lives, coupled with the ease of smuggling in contraband to Alcatraz, could have led to their involvement with outside criminal organizations. It would have been easy for such organizations to provide the men with the resources and protection they needed to avoid detection. The most compelling evidence for this theory came from interviews with former law enforcement officials who had investigated organized crime syndicates during the same time period. These officials reported hearing rumors of Alcatraz escapees being linked to criminal organizations in the years following their escape. Several known figures from the world of organized crime were said to have had connections to the island, although the evidence remained circumstantial. Moreover, rumors circulated that the Anglin brothers had been particularly well connected with criminal figures in Florida, where they reportedly had family ties. Could the brothers have reached out to their network of allies in the criminal underworld to help them disappear? Another twist on the underground network theory was the idea that the escapees had used the smuggling routes running through Mexico to get out of the country and hide. This part of the theory suggested that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers had evaded capture by crossing into Mexico, where they could have easily blended in with other expats and escaped law enforcement's gaze. Given the times, smuggling routes from California to Mexico were common, and many escapees from various institutions had used these routes to avoid detection. It's not far-fetched to think that a group of individuals fleeing from Alcatraz might have made use of these same routes, aided by criminal connections in the area. One investigator, who had spent years looking into the Anglin brothers' past, suggested that the brothers might have even been able to use their familial connections to get a foothold in Mexico, where they could have built new lives far from the prying eyes of the U.S. government. The theory was that, once in Mexico, Frank and the Anglins might have changed their identities and worked in remote parts of the country, far from the hustle and bustle of the tourist areas. However, no concrete evidence emerged to support this theory, leaving it to remain a tantalizing, though speculative, possibility. One key to understanding what might have happened to the escapees lies in their psychological profiles. Frank Morris, known for his intelligence and meticulous planning, and the Anglin brothers, who had survived their own tumultuous childhoods, had all shown remarkable perseverance and resilience during their time at Alcatraz. Psychologists who had analyzed the case often wondered, could these men have survived the extreme hardships that came after their escape? Were they prepared for the uncertainty and fear that living as fugitives would have brought? And, more importantly, how would they have coped with the psychological strain of never being able to return to the world they had once known? The emotional toll on these men was likely immense. To escape from Alcatraz wasn't just a physical challenge, it required the escapees to leave behind everything they knew, including their families and friends. In an interview with a former FBI agent involved in the original investigation, he suggested that part of the reason Frank Morris and the Anglins might have succeeded was because they understood the value of maintaining their secrecy. People often forget just how much psychological endurance it takes to escape from a place like Alcatraz and then to keep your life a secret for decades, the agent had said. It's a unique brand of survivor's mentality. This survivor's mentality could have played a significant role in their ability to stay hidden for so long. Unlike other escapees, who had been caught in a matter of months, Frank and the Anglins had shown the patience and resourcefulness necessary to keep evading the authorities for decades. As the years wore on, more reports surfaced of possible hidden communications from Frank and the Anglins, though no one could say for sure if these were authentic. One such incident came in the form of a series of cryptic letters sent to various media outlets, claiming to be from Frank Morris himself. The letters, though unsigned, contained odd, almost poetic references to the escape, as well as mentions of key details only known to the escapees. One letter, sent in 1982 to a San Francisco newspaper, read, "The clock is ticking, but the tide still pulls me back." Was this a desperate plea for recognition, or just another attempt to remain hidden while keeping the myth alive? Investigators still don't know, but it was another piece of the puzzle that left everyone wondering. Despite the numerous theories and intriguing developments, the truth about the fate of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers remained a mystery. As the years turned into decades, some had all but given up hope of ever finding the three escapees. Others, however, clung to the belief that they had made it to safety, perhaps not just once, but in many forms, always staying one step ahead of the law. But as the authorities grew colder in their pursuit and the public fascination began to fade, it seemed that the case of the Alcatraz escape would forever remain unsolved, the truth of what happened to these three men hidden forever. Still, the legend of their escape lived on, captured in books, documentaries, and in the imaginations of millions of people who had heard the story. Perhaps the most enduring question of all remained: had they truly escaped, or had they become part of a much larger, unsolvable puzzle that would haunt the public consciousness for years to come? For decades, the mystery surrounding the escapees from Alcatraz had haunted the public. Theories, speculations, and fresh leads had kept the case alive, but despite the years of investigation and numerous attempts to uncover the truth, the question remained unanswered: what truly happened to Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers? As technology advanced and new methods of investigation emerged, the story of the Alcatraz escape remained just as elusive. Yet, despite the growing sense of closure that some felt, others couldn't help but wonder if the truth was still out there, hidden in the most unexpected corners of America. In the 21st century, forensic science offered a glimmer of hope that the mystery might finally be solved. The FBI, under public pressure and a renewed interest in the case, began considering the possibility that modern DNA testing could reveal the fate of the escapees. Forensic genealogists, eager to contribute to one of America's most infamous cold cases, spearheaded the next phase of investigation. One of the most promising leads emerged in 2015 when the FBI obtained DNA samples from objects that had been found on Alcatraz Island shortly after the escape. These items, a pair of worn gloves, a torn piece of clothing, and a shoe print, had been stored for years in an FBI evidence locker but had never been fully analyzed. The samples were examined in the hope that they might yield a match to the missing escapees, or at least provide new insights into their whereabouts. While the analysis of these objects didn't yield the breakthrough many had hoped for, the process highlighted how far the investigation had come. Investigators also turned their attention to a different avenue: DNA testing of potential relatives of the escapees. Over the years, rumors had circulated that certain distant relatives of the Anglin brothers were still alive, with some having resided in small towns along the East Coast. DNA testing on these individuals, however, failed to produce any direct match with Frank Morris or the Anglins. The lack of evidence left many feeling disheartened, but it didn't end the investigation entirely. The idea that there could be relatives living among the public, perhaps unaware of their connection to one of the most notorious prison escapes in American history, added a haunting complexity to the case. In the years following Jerry Cole's startling revelation about the unmarked grave in Espanola, further efforts were made to search for any potential links between the grave and the Alcatraz escapees. Forensic teams and archaeologists returned to Espanola, hoping to uncover more evidence to solidify the connection between the mysterious grave and the escapees. The grave, which had been discovered in 2020, had shown signs of being relatively recent, possibly within the last 30 years. It was well kept, yet the lack of any formal markers or names raised more questions than answers. Forensics teams meticulously dug around the grave site and conducted tests, but even after analyzing soil samples, bones, and any trace materials, they could not definitively confirm that the remains in the grave belonged to either Frank Morris or the Anglin brothers. Though a few theories still suggested that the escapees might have taken refuge in rural areas like Hispaniola, the lack of concrete proof kept the story firmly in the realm of speculation. Local historians, however, pointed out that in many instances, remote locations such as Hispaniola had been a place where escapees, criminals, or those on the run had sought refuge. Whether Frank and the Anglins had truly made their way there remained an open question. Throughout the years, numerous sightings of individuals believed to be Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers had surfaced. They appeared in various forms, men who resembled the escapees, or people claiming to have seen them in different parts of the country. Some of the most widely reported sightings were from the 1970s and 1980s, when the three men were presumed to still be alive. One of the most compelling sightings occurred in the early 1980s when a couple in Florida reported seeing two men who resembled the Anglin brothers walking down a country road. The couple, who were driving through rural Florida, swore that the two men, despite their age, looked eerily similar to the missing escapees. They even claimed that the men were accompanied by a third individual, whose features matched Frank Morris's description. Though local authorities investigated the sighting, they were unable to confirm its legitimacy. No follow-up reports emerged, and the case was eventually forgotten. But the incident, like others, continued to fuel the public's fascination with the escapees. Could these sightings have been real, or were they just a product of wishful thinking and the power of legend? In another report, a former postal worker from Wisconsin claimed that he had seen a man who resembled Clarence Anglin in a small rural town in the late 1990s. The postal worker said the man had been working as a handyman, and though he never asked his name, the man's features were unmistakable. Again, no evidence could corroborate the sighting, leaving it in the realm of hearsay. While some dismissed these sightings as part of the mythology surrounding the escape, others couldn't shake the feeling that the men had somehow survived, just as these reports suggested. The possibility that Frank and the Anglins were still out there, living under false identities, remained tantalizingly plausible. One of the most enduring aspects of the Alcatraz escape story is the public's unrelenting fascination with it. The escape, one of the most audacious and mysterious in American history, had become the stuff of legend. It was a story that tapped into deep-seated desires for freedom, survival, and defiance of the system. For decades, it captured the imaginations of the public, inspiring books, films, documentaries, and countless amateur sleuths who believed they could solve the case. It was a story that became larger than life, a mythic tale of three men who had defied the odds, outsmarted the authorities, and disappeared without a trace. Whether they had died or escaped was secondary to the story's core appeal, that, for a brief moment in time, the impossible had seemed possible. Despite the many failed investigations, the unsubstantiated sightings, and the dead ends, the public's thirst for closure never wavered. The escape from Alcatraz had become a symbol of the ultimate question: could a person truly escape the past and vanish from the world? Even as the years passed, it was clear that the Alcatraz escapees, whether they lived or died, would forever be part of the American mythos. And in some ways, that was enough. The mystery of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers wasn't just a tale of crime and punishment, it was a story about human resilience, the desire for freedom, and the lengths to which people would go to escape the confines of a system that sought to imprison them. As the investigation into the escape continued to fade into the background of public consciousness, the haunting question remained. What really happened to the men who escaped from Alcatraz? Some believed that they had drowned in the icy water surrounding the prison, their bodies lost forever. Others were convinced they had made it out and started new lives somewhere in the world, blending into the shadows of society. A few still held on to the hope that someday, the truth would emerge, whether through a breakthrough in DNA testing, the discovery of long-lost evidence, or even the confession of one of the men themselves. But as the years stretched into decades, it became clear that the case would never have a neat, definitive ending. The truth, if it ever surfaced, would likely come in pieces, bits of evidence scattered across time and place. Until then, the story of the Alcatraz escapees would remain an unsolved puzzle, one that fascinated, mystified, and captivated the world. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As decades passed and the world continued to change, the story of the escape from Alcatraz became something more than just a criminal case. It transformed into a piece of American folklore, forever etched into the nation's psyche. The men who managed to escape from one of the most infamous prisons in history became figures of mythic proportions. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, whether they survived their escape or not, were immortalized as symbols of defiance against the system, of hope in the face of insurmountable odds. But as the case went cold and the authorities' interest waned, the lingering questions about the fate of the escapees remained a source of fascination. This chapter delves into the lasting impact of their escape, exploring how the legend of Alcatraz and its escapees continued to capture the imagination of the American public, and beyond, shaping everything from pop culture to modern criminal justice debates. The escape from Alcatraz quickly became part of the broader mythology surrounding the prison itself. Once a place of harsh punishment and near impossible security, Alcatraz had already garnered a fearsome reputation as the Rock, an island fortress that housed some of the most dangerous criminals in the United States. Yet the escape of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers added an unexpected twist to its legacy, the idea that even the most secure facility could be breached, that even the most hopeless prisoners could find a way out. This idea, that the human spirit, when pushed to its limits, could overcome even the most formidable barriers, struck a chord with the American public. The legend of the escapees became a metaphor for freedom and the power of determination, feeding into the broader cultural narrative of rebellion and the desire for a fresh start. Books, documentaries, and movies began to explore the Alcatraz escape, each one adding new layers to the mythos. The 1979 Clint Eastwood film Escape from Alcatraz became one of the most popular depictions of the case, cementing the legend in pop culture. The movie, while fictionalized in some parts, painted a picture of Frank Morris as a calm and calculating mastermind, and the Anglin brothers as resourceful and courageous, working together in a seemingly impossible escape. The portrayal of the escape was romanticized, focusing on the ingenuity and bravery of the men. It inspired a new generation of people to dream about escaping their own personal prisons, whether literal or metaphorical. Over the years, the legend continued to grow, and the escape from Alcatraz became not just a historical event but a symbol of resistance and the enduring desire for freedom. Despite the fact that the FBI had officially closed its investigation into the Alcatraz escape in 1979, the case never fully disappeared from the public eye. In fact, new interest in the case arose periodically, driven by new theories and developments, or simply by the resurgence of popular interest in unsolved mysteries. Over the years, various individuals, both professionals and amateurs, have attempted to uncover the truth about what happened to the escapees. Journalists, crime enthusiasts, and even former law enforcement officials continue to conduct their own investigations, looking for clues that could finally bring the case to a close. These efforts were often fueled by the idea that one final breakthrough would answer the lingering questions that had plagued the case for decades. Perhaps the most notable of these efforts came in the early 2000s when a group of retired law enforcement officers revisited the case with new technologies and a fresh set of eyes. While they were unable to find any new evidence that would solve the mystery, they did uncover some startling facts about the escape that had been previously overlooked. For example, the discovery of new reports detailing the months leading up to the escape, documents that had been buried in an evidence vault for years, offered a glimpse into the meticulous planning that had gone into the breakout. The investigation into Frank and the Anglins' fate also prompted a renewed interest in Alcatraz as a historical site. The island, which had been decommissioned as a prison in 1963, became a popular tourist destination, with thousands of visitors flocking to the infamous prison every year. Tours of Alcatraz included stops at the cells of Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin, and the story of the escape was a central part of the narrative offered to tourists. For many visitors, the story of the escape was the highlight of their visit, sparking their imaginations and leaving them with the same lingering questions that had haunted the case for decades. The case of the Alcatraz escapees also continued to have an impact on discussions of criminal justice in America. The escape highlighted the flaws in the prison system, particularly with regard to how inmates could manipulate their environments and outsmart the authorities. Frank and the Anglins' successful escape raised questions about the effectiveness of maximum security prisons, leading to debates about prison reform and how best to balance security with rehabilitation. In the decades following the escape, the rise of private prisons, overcrowding in the U.S. prison system, and the increasing use of solitary confinement in correctional facilities prompted renewed conversations about what it meant to be incarcerated in the United States. The story of the Alcatraz escape became a touchstone for these debates, with many asking whether the methods used to imprison people were truly effective, or whether the focus should be on rehabilitation and the reintegration of inmates into society. The Alcatraz escape was also viewed through the lens of race and class. Many advocates for prison reform pointed out that the men who escaped from Alcatraz were part of a broader system that disproportionately incarcerated poor and minority individuals. The escape, in this view, was emblematic of the frustrations that many people in marginalized communities felt about the criminal justice system. It raised the question of whether the pursuit of justice could ever be truly balanced, or if the system was inevitably flawed. In the end, the question remains, did Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers truly escape from Alcatraz, or did they die trying? Despite the mountains of evidence, the endless theories, and the decades of investigation, no one can say for certain what happened to them. Some believe they made it out, escaped to freedom, and lived out their lives far from the reach of the law. They imagine the men living in quiet seclusion, perhaps in small towns in Florida or Mexico, as the years slowly passed. Others are convinced that they perished in the frigid waters, their bodies lost forever, their escape a momentary triumph that ended in tragedy. What's clear, however, is that the escape from Alcatraz was never just about the men who fled. It was about what they represented. The desire for freedom, the belief that even the most impossible dreams can be achieved, and the unyielding spirit of survival in the face of overwhelming odds. The legend of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers lives on, not as a solved mystery, but as a symbol of defiance, hope, and the relentless pursuit of a better life. And in the hearts and minds of those who remember their story, they will never truly be gone. They will remain, forever part of the American consciousness, as figures who prove that even the most locked down, unyielding place can be outsmarted, and that freedom, no matter how fleeting, is worth everything. As the years continued to pass, the investigation into the fate of the Alcatraz escapees faded into the background, becoming less of an active case and more of a historical enigma. Yet, the mysteries surrounding the escape had not entirely lost their appeal. In the early 2000s, the case was briefly revived by new information that surfaced, sparking renewed interest among both the public and investigative agencies. This chapter explores the final pieces of the puzzle, examining how one last effort to solve the case brought to light some surprising developments, both shocking and anticlimactic. It looks into the investigators who revisited the case with fresh eyes, as well as the unanswered questions that still haunt the story of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. In 2003, the Alcatraz escape case saw a revival when a retired FBI agent, William M. L. Johnson, unearthed previously overlooked documents in an old evidence box that had been sealed for decades. These documents, dating back to the early 1970s, included notes from an investigation into a man who had been arrested in Michigan, only months after the Alcatraz escape, on suspicion of being involved in a number of strange crimes. The man, identified as Johnny Armstrong, was reportedly a drifter with a reputation for adopting false identities. At the time of his arrest, he had been linked to a string of robberies and had been caught impersonating a man who bore an uncanny resemblance to Frank Morris. During his interrogations, Armstrong had reportedly given vague details about his past and claimed that he had once been a guest at Alcatraz. His odd comments, however, were never pursued further by the original investigators. Johnson, who had been involved in the investigation of the escape during his early career, saw the notes on Armstrong as potentially significant. After months of research, he discovered that Armstrong had been in and out of multiple penitentiaries across the U.S. and had ties to several people who had spent time at Alcatraz during the 1960s. Although there was no direct evidence linking Armstrong to the escape, the timing and circumstances surrounding his arrest raised new questions. Could Armstrong have been connected to the escape? Was it possible that he had known Morris or the Anglin brothers? This discovery led to an influx of new theories, many suggesting that Armstrong had been involved in orchestrating the escape or may have even been one of the individuals who helped the three men flee the island. However, no solid proof emerged, and many were quick to dismiss the theory as nothing more than coincidence. Yet, for those following the case, this new lead was an important piece of the puzzle, and one that had been neglected for decades. Another surprising development came in 2006, when forensic experts returned to the remains of the raft that the escapees had constructed. The raft was discovered by an underwater team in 1990, but it had remained largely unexplored until a renewed investigation prompted closer examination. In a twist of fate, forensic scientists managed to recover a scrap of fabric from the raft, which had been submerged in the bay's murky waters for decades. When the scrap was analyzed, it revealed traces of unique fibers and potential DNA evidence. Forensic scientists were hopeful that they had finally found something that could bring closure to the case. After all, DNA testing could now potentially identify which of the escapees, or their associates, had been responsible for the construction of the raft. After comparing the DNA samples from the fabric with those taken from Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin, as well as their close relatives, the results were inconclusive. The traces of DNA recovered from the fabric were not a perfect match for any of the escapees, but they were suggestive of a possible link to a distant relative. Unfortunately, the technology at the time was not sophisticated enough to confirm a definitive match. For some, this was a bittersweet moment. It wasn't a breakthrough, but it wasn't a dead end either. The raft itself, along with the DNA evidence, was put on hold once again, with many experts skeptical that it would ever lead to a conclusion. While the investigation stagnated, public interest in the Alcatraz escape continued to thrive. The legend of the three escapees had taken on a life of its own, a staple of American crime lore, always present in the background of popular culture. In 2007, a new documentary called Alcatraz, The Untold Story sparked a wave of renewed interest in the case. The film introduced new interviews with people who had worked on the case in the 1960s, as well as survivors of the escapees era. It featured a range of perspectives, some from those who believed the escapees had drowned, others who argued that the men had made it out and lived the remainder of their lives in secret. The documentary included previously unseen footage from the days after the escape, showing the immediate aftermath. Investigators combed through the prison with a fine-toothed comb, looking for clues and coming up empty-handed. But what struck a chord with viewers was the interview with one of the prison guards who had been on duty the night of the escape. The guard, who had since retired, spoke of his experience of searching the cells the following morning and realizing that the escape had been meticulously planned and executed. His chilling comment echoed in the minds of those who watched the film. It was as if they disappeared into thin air. The documentary captivated a new generation of viewers, many of whom were fascinated not just by the mystery but by the sense of adventure and daring that the escape represented. The mythos surrounding the escapees, along with the unanswered questions, helped to ensure that their story would live on for many years to come. By the time the 50th anniversary of the escape rolled around in 2012, the Alcatraz escape had become as much a symbol of freedom as it was a mystery. In the years since, countless people, through books, documentaries, and internet forums, had taken it upon themselves to analyze the case, propose new theories, and speculate about what really happened. Despite the public obsession with solving the case, however, some of the investigators and experts who had worked on the case felt that the obsession itself was part of the problem. For them, the question wasn't necessarily whether the escapees had survived or not, but rather why the world seemed so intent on finding a tidy resolution to a story that, by its very nature, might never offer one. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, they argued, represented something larger than their individual fates. Their story was about the human drive to break free from imprisonment, whether physical or metaphorical. Their escape was an act of rebellion, not just against Alcatraz, but against the very notion that a person could be truly confined, that they could be erased from history. While the FBI and various investigative bodies had long since closed their cases, the mystery of the Alcatraz escape continues to fascinate, reminding the world that sometimes the truth is more elusive than any one person can uncover. The final pieces of the case may never fully come together, but the escape itself, its daring, its ingenuity, and its legacy, remains a testament to the enduring human spirit. In the end, the escape from Alcatraz did not need a definitive conclusion to retain its power. It became part of the American consciousness, woven into the fabric of national history and culture. The men who escaped were never truly gone, their story would live on in the countless theories, books, and documentaries that would continue to be created. As time passed, the story of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers became less about finding answers and more about celebrating the audacity of their attempt. Their escape was a symbol of the human desire for freedom, a reminder that, sometimes, it is not the end of a story that matters, but the incredible journey it takes to get there. As the years turned into decades, the case of the Alcatraz escape seemed destined to remain unsolved. Despite the renewed interest and a few promising breakthroughs, the mystery of what truly happened to Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers has endured, leaving behind more questions than answers. This chapter explores the most persistent unanswered questions, delving into the elements of the case that continue to elude resolution. While much has been uncovered, there remains a sense that the final piece of the puzzle is somewhere just beyond reach. The theories continue to circulate, the investigations continue to ebb and flow, but the one thing that remains constant is the gnawing uncertainty that, perhaps, we will never know the truth about their fate. The most enduring question of all is, of course, whether the escapees survived their harrowing swim across the cold, treacherous waters of San Francisco Bay. Most investigators, particularly in the early days following the escape, believed that the men had drowned. After all, the waters surrounding Alcatraz were notoriously dangerous, with strong currents and icy temperatures. The FBI's official stance was that the escapees never made it to the mainland and that their bodies were swept away by the current, lost forever to the ocean. Yet, as more time passed and the case remained unsolved, alternative theories began to emerge. Many people, especially conspiracy theorists, believed that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers had somehow managed to escape the island and disappear into the civilian world. Several reasons were cited to support this theory. Firstly, the escape plan itself showed remarkable ingenuity. The escapees had spent months crafting their escape tools and planning their route. They had created a raft, pieced together from raincoats, and planned their escape meticulously. The raft was durable enough to float on the bay's waters, and the escapees, having been familiar with the tides, had chosen a time when the currents were at their weakest. Some believe this careful planning was enough to overcome the risks posed by the water. Furthermore, rumors circulated about sightings of the escapees in distant places, from Mexico to Florida. In particular, some believed that the Anglin brothers had managed to blend into society and live out their days under new identities. However, no concrete evidence ever emerged to confirm this theory, and many were quick to dismiss these reports as wishful thinking or coincidence. In 1975, the FBI issued a final statement declaring that it was unlikely that the escapees survived. Yet the conflicting accounts and the sheer mystery surrounding their disappearance meant that the possibility of survival remained an open question, one that continued to be debated by crime enthusiasts, conspiracy theorists, and amateur detectives alike. Another unanswered question revolves around the role of the Anglin family. Throughout the investigation, there were persistent rumors that members of the Anglin family, particularly those close to John and Clarence, may have had knowledge of or even aided in their escape. It was rumored that the brothers had received help from family members or associates, who smuggled in supplies or provided them with a place to hide once they escaped. Interestingly, the Anglin family was known to be very tight-knit. John and Clarence had both been raised in rural Georgia, where they had close connections to their siblings. Some speculated that their family's loyalty to them could have played a role in the escape. Did the Anglin brothers have a prearranged escape plan, or was the entire operation solely the work of Frank Morris? Was there a larger network of people involved, helping the escapees find shelter or new identities after they fled? Over the years, the Anglin family has remained relatively quiet about the escape. Though their descendants were occasionally interviewed by media outlets, there was little definitive information about their involvement or knowledge of the escape. As with most aspects of the case, these lingering questions continue to hang in the air. In the years following the escape, numerous attempts were made to uncover new forensic evidence that could shed light on the fate of the escapees. The discovery of the raft scrap in 2006 had generated some buzz, and DNA analysis raised hopes that scientists could finally pinpoint the identity of the person who had built it. Unfortunately, the DNA results were inconclusive, leaving the forensic community at a dead end. Although some scientists believed the DNA could be a distant relative of one of the escapees, no direct match to the men themselves was found. The DNA evidence, while not definitive, also raised questions about how much evidence could truly be recovered after so many years. Even with modern forensic techniques, the passage of time and the harsh conditions of the bay meant that key pieces of evidence, such as the escapees' bodies, had likely deteriorated or been washed away. The question of whether DNA could have conclusively determined the escapees' fates became another frustrating part of the puzzle that would remain unsolved. Some experts speculated that additional evidence may still be buried on the island itself, and that advances in technology or further excavations could eventually unearth something significant. However, with the passage of so much time, the chances of finding any more conclusive evidence seem slim. Another long-standing mystery surrounds the eyewitness accounts of the escape. Over the years, various individuals have come forward claiming to have seen the escapees or to have had knowledge of their whereabouts. In particular, there were reports of a man who resembled Frank Morris seen in the San Francisco area in the years after the escape. In one instance, a man fitting Morris's description was allegedly seen living under an assumed name. While these accounts were intriguing, they were not accompanied by any solid evidence. Many skeptics dismissed these reports as mere coincidence or wishful thinking, given the legend that had grown around the escape. The lack of concrete evidence, paired with the fact that none of these sightings were confirmed by law enforcement, means that these witness accounts remain in the realm of speculation. Still, the continued appearance of individuals claiming to have seen the escapees is a testament to the power of the Alcatraz legend, whether based in truth or simply fueled by the mystique of the prison and its history. For all the unanswered questions, the desire for closure persists. The case of the Alcatraz escape resonates with so many because it taps into a fundamental aspect of the human experience, the search for resolution. We want to know what happened, to have the mystery solved, and to see justice served, or in this case, the truth revealed. But sometimes, as in the case of the Alcatraz escapees, the mystery remains elusive. The truth is not always neat, tidy, or easily explained. While many wish for a definitive ending to the story, whether it's a discovery of bodies, a confession from the escapees, or a breakthrough in the investigation, there is also something compelling about the ambiguity. The unanswered questions leave room for imagination, for theories to grow and evolve. It's as if the escape from Alcatraz, in its very uncertainty, has become an enduring symbol of the human pursuit of freedom, a pursuit that may never have a final answer. Perhaps the mystery of what happened to Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers will always remain unsolved. But that doesn't detract from the power of their story. The unanswered questions will continue to fuel speculation, inspire new generations, and remind us of the daring men who attempted the impossible and left behind a legacy that will never be forgotten. The Alcatraz escape, whether solved or not, has left an indelible mark on history. The daring escape of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, while shrouded in mystery, became more than just an episode in criminal history. It became a symbol, one that spoke to the human desire for freedom, the lengths people will go to escape confinement, and the enigmatic nature of those who challenge authority and fate. This chapter explores the lasting legacy of the Alcatraz escape, examining how the story has evolved over time and how it continues to influence not just investigations into unsolved crimes, but popular culture as well. Alcatraz Island, once a place of brutal incarceration, became more than just a federal prison, it became a symbol of the impossible. From the moment the Alcatraz escape made headlines in 1962, it turned the island from a symbol of inescapable punishment into a representation of resistance. Today, Alcatraz is one of the most visited historical sites in the United States, drawing millions of tourists every year. Visitors walk the very halls where Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin spent their days, touring the prison and imagining the escape that still haunts the place. In many ways, Alcatraz has become larger than life, with the stories of daring escape attempts, including the famous 1962 breakout, forever linked to the island's history. Alcatraz's reputation as a max security prison was solidified long before the escape, but after 1962, it became the backdrop for an enduring myth. This shift from being a notorious prison to being a popular tourist attraction only grew stronger when the prison officially closed in 1963. The escape had made the island legendary, and its physical isolation from the mainland, along with its history of incarceration, made it the perfect breeding ground for myth-making. Whether or not the escapees survived, the story would forever be woven into the island's fabric, contributing to Alcatraz's mystique. Over the decades, the Alcatraz escape has captivated not just criminal investigators and historians, but people from all walks of life. From amateur sleuths to professional criminologists, the mystery of the escapees' fate continues to intrigue. People are fascinated by the cunning nature of the escape itself, how three men, deemed impossible to break free, managed to orchestrate such a bold plan. This fascination extends far beyond historical curiosity. In the 1970s, the story of the escape was immortalized in books, with authors like J. Campbell Bruce publishing Alcatraz, the true crime story of the 1962 escape, which not only recounted the events but also gave voice to the conspiracy theories surrounding the escape. This was followed by films and television programs that capitalized on the story, making Alcatraz synonymous with mystery and adventure. One of the most famous pop culture representations of the escape was Clint Eastwood's 1979 film Escape from Alcatraz. Based on Bruce's book, the movie portrayed Frank Morris as a determined and brilliant criminal who outsmarted the system. The film depicted the escape in dramatic fashion, with Eastwood's portrayal of Morris cementing the escape as one of Hollywood's most iconic stories. Though these portrayals are fictionalized, they have nonetheless kept the public's imagination alive. The story of the escape from Alcatraz has been retold time and again, each iteration adding layers of mystery, and in doing so, perpetuating the legend. As time passed, the escape became a part of America's criminal folklore, and its influence reached far beyond Hollywood. The idea of escape from Alcatraz became synonymous with the American dream, an underdog story of resilience, ingenuity, and defiance against seemingly insurmountable odds. The cultural impact of the story transcended film and literature, inspiring music, art, and even video games. In 2006, a video game titled Alcatraz Breakout was released, where players took on the role of a prisoner attempting to escape from the infamous prison. While it wasn't directly based on the 1962 escape, the concept of escaping from a high-security prison like Alcatraz still drew heavily from the legend of the escapees. The game, along with other works of art, demonstrated how the story of Alcatraz had evolved into a symbol of rebellion, highlighting the universal desire for freedom. The escape has also found its way into popular music. Songs like The Beatles' I Am the Walrus and Johnny Cash's Folsom Prison Blues often cite Alcatraz as a symbol of imprisonment and defiance. These works, though not directly about the 1962 escape, are often inspired by the idea of Alcatraz as a place where the rules could be bent, broken, or outsmarted. Perhaps the most significant aspect of Alcatraz's legacy in pop culture is the fact that, despite all of the speculation and the various theories, the escape has never been completely solved. This, in itself, has made it an enduring topic for media and discussion. It keeps people talking, theorizing, and coming up with new interpretations. It's no longer just a true crime story, it's a legend. The legacy of the Alcatraz escape extends beyond the realm of mystery and intrigue. It also offers valuable lessons in human nature and resilience. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, who were considered to be some of the most ingenious criminals of their time, demonstrated an extraordinary capacity for planning and defying authority. Their escape was the result of months of meticulous preparation, an ability to think outside the box, and a deep understanding of the system they were trying to outwit. While the story may seem like one of sheer audacity, it also illustrates a fundamental human desire, the urge for freedom. In many ways, Morris and the Anglin brothers became folk heroes, figures who dared to challenge an unjust system. Their story speaks to those who feel trapped, whether in prison or in life, and who yearn for the chance to escape, to make a fresh start. The escape also shows how some of the most dangerous criminals are not simply individuals of physical strength or violence, but also those who possess intelligence and cunning. The successful escape from Alcatraz by three men who were deemed unescapable was an example of how brains could triumph over brawn. Their story has often been used to spark discussions about the criminal justice system and how, in some cases, even the most secure institutions may be vulnerable to those who understand their weaknesses. Although the fate of the escapees is still unknown, the legacy of their escape is also closely tied to the broader history of criminal justice in America. For years, Alcatraz was viewed as a symbol of America's tough-on-crime approach, where the most dangerous criminals were held in near-impossible conditions. But as the case of the escapees remains unsolved, it raises questions about the very idea of confinement and the lengths individuals will go to in order to gain their freedom. In many ways, Alcatraz's legacy has pushed society to think more critically about justice and the prison system. While the escape may have been a defiant and bold act, it's also a reminder that those who are locked away, whether fairly or unjustly, will often find a way to escape. The pursuit of justice and the efforts to maintain control over individuals have evolved over time, but the escape from Alcatraz remains a symbol of human ingenuity, resistance, and the complex nature of freedom and punishment. The legacy of the Alcatraz escape is ultimately one of uncertainty, audacity, and resilience. It has become more than just the story of three men attempting to break free from one of the world's most notorious prisons, it has become a symbol of resistance against the impossible. As time marches on, the story will undoubtedly continue to evolve, feeding the collective imagination and encouraging new generations to speculate, theorize, and learn from the escape that never was fully solved. No matter where the truth lies, the story of the Alcatraz escape will endure. Whether the men survived and lived out their days in hiding or succumbed to the harsh waters of the bay, their legend continues to captivate and inspire. It's a story that transcends the need for resolution and instead celebrates the eternal desire for freedom, and the lengths people will go to in order to achieve it. As time has passed, new theories have emerged, fueled by advancements in technology and the persistence of those who refuse to let the mystery of the Alcatraz escape fade into the past. Despite the FBI's closing of the case in the 1970s, modern technology and forensic techniques have given rise to a renewed interest in the escape. With new tools, methods, and insights at their disposal, a new generation of investigators, both amateur and professional, has revived the hunt for answers. In this chapter, we explore the new theories that have emerged over the past few decades and how technology has changed the landscape of the investigation. From digital analysis to new investigative techniques, the case of the Alcatraz escape remains an enigma, with new twists continuing to unfold. While the Alcatraz escape faded into the background of public consciousness in the years following the 1960s, it was far from forgotten. In the early 2000s, with the rise of the internet and digital communities, discussions surrounding the escape gained new momentum. Forums, blogs, and websites dedicated to unsolved mysteries were created, and the Alcatraz escape quickly became one of the most debated topics in the realm of true crime. By 2008, a renewed interest sparked a fresh wave of investigation. The public's fascination with crime and unsolved mysteries, coupled with the increasing access to information through the internet, made it possible for individuals from all over the world to contribute to the investigation of long-forgotten cases. It wasn't just the story of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers that intrigued people, it was the larger idea of a high-profile crime remaining unsolved for over 40 years. The 2000s also marked a turning point in how unsolved crimes were investigated. New documentaries and television specials, including the 2015 History Channel special Alcatraz, The Lost Escape, renewed public interest in the case. These programs often used modern techniques and theories to re-examine the escape, providing fresh perspectives and new theories about the men's survival. It was during this period that new technologies would begin to reshape the conversation. One of the most significant advancements in modern investigative techniques is the development of DNA analysis. In the past, authorities could only rely on eyewitness testimony and physical evidence like fingerprints. But with the introduction of DNA testing in the late 20th century, investigators gained a powerful tool for solving crimes. In the case of the Alcatraz escape, DNA has played a crucial, albeit inconclusive, role. In 2006, a team of researchers working on the case discovered an old scrap of material from the raft, which had been constructed by the escapees from raincoats. This discovery provided the opportunity for DNA testing, but the results were less definitive than many had hoped. DNA testing on the fabric returned a weak result, suggesting that it was indeed human DNA, though it couldn't be matched to any known individuals, including the escapees themselves. Some experts believed the DNA might be from a relative of one of the escapees, but this connection was never definitively proven. Despite this setback, many still believe that advanced DNA techniques, combined with further excavation and testing, could eventually yield the breakthrough needed to conclusively link the escapees to the raft or even their ultimate fate. Moreover, as DNA technology has continued to advance, some investigators have speculated that more sensitive testing methods could reveal traces of the escapees' presence in places they may have been after their escape. Some have even proposed that DNA found at various sites in and around San Francisco could be used to track down potential leads or new evidence, should the proper resources be dedicated to the case. While it remains uncertain whether DNA analysis will ever provide the key to solving the mystery, the potential of this technology is undeniable. It is possible that the future holds a breakthrough, even if it is decades down the line. Another revolutionary advancement that has impacted investigations like that of the Alcatraz escape is forensic modeling and digital reconstruction. In recent years, advances in computer technology have allowed investigators to create more accurate reconstructions of events, environments, and even people. In the case of the Alcatraz escape, digital recreations of the prison itself, combined with weather and tide data, have allowed researchers to simulate the conditions the escapees faced. These models provide a clearer understanding of how the escapees might have navigated the waters of the bay. For example, digital simulations of the tides, currents, and weather patterns during the time of the escape provide important context for assessing the feasibility of their successful escape. Additionally, forensic experts have worked on reconstructing the faces and features of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers using modern imaging technology. This technology allows investigators to create more accurate, updated portraits of the escapees, which might assist in future identification or sightings. While this method has yet to provide any definitive clues, it has nevertheless been a valuable tool in keeping the case alive in the public eye. One of the most intriguing elements to emerge in recent years is the resurfacing of an old lead from 1975. A local San Francisco reporter, who had interviewed residents and law enforcement officials at the time of the escape, reported hearing rumors about a sighting of one of the escapees in the area. The man was allegedly seen in a rural part of California, living under an assumed name and showing up at various small towns. This sighting has been hotly debated over the years, with many dismissing it as nothing more than a false claim. However, modern technology, including facial recognition software and databases of missing persons and fugitive records, has made it possible to search old leads with a new lens. Some have speculated that advanced software could help verify this sighting by comparing the description to records of individuals who might have lived under a different name during that time period. Though there is still no concrete evidence to confirm the legitimacy of this lead, the 1975 sighting, coupled with new investigative tools, has led some to believe that the escapees may have evaded capture for years. The prospect that one or more of them might have lived out their lives under a new identity continues to fuel speculation, especially in light of the theories that suggest the escapees received help from external sources. While the FBI officially closed the case decades ago, the Alcatraz escape remains an open file for many investigators, both official and amateur. The renewed interest in the case, coupled with modern technology, has spurred some private investigators and true crime enthusiasts to dive back into the mystery, attempting to piece together the fragments of evidence that have remained since the escape. Some investigators believe that there may be more evidence hidden on the island itself, waiting to be uncovered by new searches. Others suggest that the key to the escape's resolution might lie in uncovering the truth about the various possible hideouts or safehouses the escapees may have used. Whatever the outcome, the case has become a symbol of the ongoing pursuit of justice, the desire for closure, and the never-ending quest for truth. But even if the case is never definitively solved, the advancements in technology and the fresh wave of theories surrounding the Alcatraz escape have breathed new life into one of America's most famous mysteries. The case remains unsolved, but the spirit of investigation, and the hope that one day the truth will come to light, continues to push the story forward. In the end, the Alcatraz escape represents something far greater than just a criminal case. It embodies the human quest for freedom, the allure of mystery, and the persistence of those who refuse to let a story die. Despite the passage of time and the unanswered questions that remain, the use of modern technology and new investigative approaches shows that, even decades after the escape, the mystery is far from over. The legacy of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers continues to inspire both seasoned investigators and curious minds, and their story remains an enduring part of the American consciousness. Whether they escaped to freedom or met their end in the cold, unforgiving waters of San Francisco Bay, the mystery of the Alcatraz escape is one that will remain, unbroken, for generations to come. The search for the Alcatraz escapees has not only centered around Frank Morris but has also placed a significant focus on the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence. Their background, their ties to the community, and the mysteries surrounding their fates after the escape remain vital pieces of the puzzle. In this chapter, we take a closer look at the Anglin family's history, their roles in the escape, and how their familial connections may hold the key to solving the mystery that has baffled authorities for over 6 decades. John and Clarence Anglin were born into a family with a troubled history, a history of crime, poverty, and a struggle against the odds. Growing up in a small town in Georgia, the brothers were no strangers to hardship. Their family was large, with several siblings, and life was often a struggle for survival. Their parents were both poor, and the brothers were exposed to a life of crime at an early age, learning from older relatives who had brushes with the law. Though they were close, John and Clarence had different personalities. John, the older of the two, was known for being impulsive and often rebellious. Clarence, on the other hand, was quieter and more thoughtful, though no less involved in criminal activities. Both were involved in a series of petty crimes and thefts as teenagers, with their criminal careers escalating as they grew older. The brothers' path to Alcatraz was paved by a series of increasingly serious offenses. Both were arrested and convicted on charges ranging from bank robbery to armed robbery. Their crimes, though not as heinous as those of some of the more notorious criminals of their time, led them down a path that eventually brought them to the infamous federal penitentiary. For John and Clarence, Alcatraz represented a place where escape seemed almost impossible. Yet, like Frank Morris, they found a way to challenge the system, defying the odds and embarking on a daring escape that would make them infamous in criminal history. Understanding the Anglin brothers' motivations and the potential role of their family in the escape requires an examination of their relationships outside of prison. The Anglins had a strong familial bond, and this connection may have been a crucial element in their successful breakout. Reports have suggested that the Anglin family played a significant role in the events leading up to the escape, with family members allegedly providing assistance during the planning process. Over the years, there have been numerous reports of suspected relatives of the Anglins being involved in the plot to aid the escape. These rumors have remained largely speculative, but investigators have not ruled out the possibility that the brothers' family network, both inside and outside of prison, helped facilitate the escape. Some theories even suggest that the brothers may have had a secret, safe house set up by their family where they could hide after the escape. According to various accounts from former inmates and prison staff, the Anglin brothers were known to have maintained correspondence with family members outside the prison during their incarceration. Whether this correspondence was innocent or part of an elaborate escape plan remains unclear, but it certainly raises questions about how much assistance the brothers might have received from their family. The suspicion that family members were involved gained more traction when it was revealed that, following the escape, the Anglin brothers' family members continued to visit their old neighborhood in the rural towns of Georgia and Florida. Some reports even claim that residents of these towns reported seeing people resembling the escapees years after the breakout. The involvement of the Anglin family, or at least their possible awareness of the escape, further complicates the mystery. If the family was helping the brothers, it would mean the escape was a far more coordinated effort than originally assumed. Furthermore, it would suggest that the brothers, far from being isolated figures in the plot, had an entire network of support that stretched far beyond the walls of Alcatraz. Another element that has captured the attention of investigators is the mysterious circumstances surrounding the Anglin sisters. While the brothers were incarcerated, their sisters, who were reportedly living in Georgia and Florida, led relatively quiet lives. However, some believe that the sisters might have been more involved than previously thought. In 2015, a local journalist working on the Alcatraz escape case unearthed documents that pointed to the possibility that one of the Anglin sisters might have been questioned in connection with a missing person case in the 1970s. The case involved a woman, presumed to be a relative of the Anglins, who was believed to have disappeared around the same time as the escapees. Though the missing person investigation was eventually closed, the case of the Anglin sisters remains a point of intrigue for those researching the family's possible involvement in the escape. If the Anglin sisters were indeed involved, it would not be the first time that family members helped criminals after an escape. Historically, there are numerous instances where families have aided fugitive relatives, providing them with false identities, financial support, or safe houses to hide in. The possibility that the Anglin sisters helped the brothers after their escape remains just that, possibility, but it offers another layer of mystery that keeps investigators coming back to the case. In 1979, a chilling letter was sent to the San Francisco Police Department that appeared to have been written by John Anglin. The letter, which was found in an abandoned house near the Anglin family's old neighborhood, was cryptic but appeared to suggest that the brothers had successfully escaped and lived for many years in hiding. The letter contained an eerie declaration that the Anglin brothers had evaded authorities and were living relatively undetected. Whether the letter was genuine or a hoax remains a subject of debate. However, investigators have speculated that, if it was authentic, it could mean that the Anglins had been living under assumed identities, protected by their family and friends. Though the letter's legitimacy is still unclear, it reignites the question, did the Anglin brothers survive the escape and evade capture, or were they swallowed up by the treacherous waters of San Francisco Bay? The story of the Anglin family's possible role in the Alcatraz escape is one of intrigue and speculation. While there is no definitive evidence to suggest the brothers received direct help from their family members, the possibility remains. The familial connections and ties to the community in Georgia and Florida add complexity to the case, making it even more difficult to decipher the truth. As new investigations and theories continue to emerge, the mystery of the Anglin brothers remains unsolved. Whether they lived out their days in hiding, as some believe, or met an untimely end, their escape continues to be one of the most tantalizing unsolved cases in American criminal history. The question of whether Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin survived their escape from Alcatraz has captivated both the public and investigators for over 6 decades. Despite the lack of definitive evidence, numerous theories have been proposed over the years, each presenting different possibilities about the escapees' fate. In this chapter, we explore the most popular and controversial theories about the escape and whether the men survived their daring breakout. The most widely believed theory is that the 3 men successfully made it to shore, evading the authorities and disappearing into the world beyond Alcatraz. Supporters of this theory point to the preparation that went into the escape, particularly the construction of the makeshift raft and the efforts to cover their tracks. The escapees had planned their route carefully. They had used raincoats to craft a raft, which they then carried through a hole they'd painstakingly drilled in their cells. On the night of the escape, they had no choice but to rely on the tides and their ability to navigate the cold, dangerous waters of the San Francisco Bay. Though conditions were harsh, the trio had one key advantage: they knew Alcatraz's layout better than anyone. The prison itself was located on a small island, isolated from the mainland, making it difficult for law enforcement to track anyone who managed to escape. Investigators who support this theory argue that the men must have had help from external sources once they reached the mainland. Over the years, many have speculated that they were met by accomplices who provided them with a safe house or transportation out of California altogether. While the raft was never found, some believe it could have been discarded after they reached the mainland or washed away with the tide. There are reports of strange sightings in nearby rural areas in the years after the escape, with witnesses claiming to have seen men who resembled the escapees. This, combined with the lack of further leads or evidence pointing to their capture, has led some to believe that they indeed escaped to freedom. Another widely discussed theory is that the escapees did not survive the treacherous waters of the San Francisco Bay. The conditions the men faced during their escape were far from ideal: freezing waters, strong tides, and the potential for hypothermia. It is believed that the escapees would have been exhausted by the time they entered the water, making it unlikely they could have navigated the bay successfully. Many point to the fact that no bodies were ever recovered from the waters of the bay. Some experts argue that the men may have drowned, but their bodies were simply never found. The strong currents could have easily carried their remains far from the prison or into nearby areas that were difficult for investigators to search. The mystery of the missing bodies has been one of the most enduring aspects of the escape, as the lack of any solid evidence of their demise raises further questions about their survival. In 1975, an investigation led by the FBI concluded that the escapees likely perished in the bay, citing the dangerous conditions. However, their report was largely based on circumstantial evidence, such as the unrecovered raft and the absence of any sightings of the men in the years after the escape. For many, this theory remains the most plausible explanation. Despite the lack of bodies, some still believe that the water's cold temperatures and dangerous conditions made survival impossible, especially considering that the men did not have the necessary equipment to withstand such extreme circumstances. Yet, the fact that no evidence has emerged to confirm this theory has left room for doubt. A more elaborate theory suggests that the escapees staged their own deaths in order to disappear into society. Proponents of this theory argue that the men, knowing they were unlikely to survive the treacherous waters of the bay, might have orchestrated their own deaths, with the intention of later reappearing under different identities. In this version of events, the escapees could have used the cover of their presumed deaths to start new lives elsewhere. After the escape, it's possible that the men switched identities or received help from accomplices who had prepared false documents for them. This theory draws on the idea that the authorities might never have fully investigated the possibility that the escapees were living among the population under new names, believing them to be dead after the escape. Supporters of this theory often point to the fact that the authorities were unable to find any definitive evidence of the escapees' demise. For many, the idea that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers faked their deaths seems plausible, especially given the fact that criminal networks and underground societies can provide support for people who are trying to vanish. A variant of the faked death theory is the idea that the escapees simply went into hiding, knowing that their best chance of survival was to live in isolation. According to this theory, the men did not try to flee the country but instead hid in plain sight in remote areas of the United States. Some believe that the escapees found shelter in rural areas where they were less likely to be discovered, living under false names and carefully avoiding any contact with the outside world. Over the years, rumors and sightings of men resembling the escapees have surfaced in places such as Florida, Georgia, and the Midwest, where people have claimed to see men matching the description of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. This theory is supported by the fact that, while there have been no confirmed sightings of the escapees, there have been consistent reports of men who looked strikingly similar to them in various regions of the country. In particular, some investigators have pointed to reports from local communities near the Anglin family's hometown in Georgia, where relatives of the escapees still live. Another theory that has gained traction in recent years is the idea that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers were assisted by an organized criminal network, which provided them with the resources and connections necessary to escape successfully. Supporters of this theory suggest that the escapees had connections to individuals on the outside who were involved in organized crime. These individuals, working with the escapees, could have provided transportation, false identities, and safe havens. Over the years, there have been hints of criminal involvement, such as the sighting of a suspicious car near Alcatraz shortly after the escape. One of the most fascinating aspects of this theory is the possibility that the escapees may have had contacts within the prison itself, perhaps in the form of corrupt guards or other inmates. If such a network existed, it would explain how the escape was carried out with such precision and secrecy. While there is no definitive evidence to confirm any of these theories, each one offers a plausible explanation for what might have happened to the escapees. Whether they survived, drowned, faked their deaths, went into hiding, or were helped by a criminal network, the fate of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers remains one of the most compelling mysteries in American criminal history. As new technologies, such as DNA analysis and digital forensics, continue to evolve, there is hope that the truth will eventually come to light. But for now, the question remains, did they make it? The Alcatraz escape of 1962 has had a profound impact not only on law enforcement but also on popular culture and society's perception of criminals, escape artistry, and the prison system. Over the years, the escapees' audacious breakout and the mystery surrounding their fate have inspired numerous books, films, documentaries, and even inspired copycat escapes. But beyond these cultural expressions, the psychological effects on the people directly involved, law enforcement, the escapees, and the general public, have been just as significant. For Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, the decision to escape from Alcatraz was not just a daring act of rebellion, it was a psychological survival mechanism. They were men who had been in prison for years, facing the harsh conditions of the notorious federal penitentiary. The daily grind of confinement, the constant threat of violence, and the seemingly insurmountable walls of the prison would have weighed heavily on their minds. Psychologically, their decision to escape likely stemmed from a deep desire for freedom, a primal instinct to break free from what they saw as the suffocating confines of their environment. They had all been convicted of serious crimes and knew that their chances of survival were slim. However, in the world of crime, the act of escape can offer the illusion of a second chance. The men were willing to take the ultimate risk, knowing full well that they were playing with their lives. This mindset reveals a lot about the psychology of prisoners. For many, the escape represents the ultimate form of resistance against an oppressive system, a final assertion of control in an environment where they otherwise have none. Psychologists often note that criminals, especially those who are imprisoned for long periods, may develop what's called reactance, which is a psychological response where a person's freedom is threatened, and they respond by doing everything in their power to regain it. In their case, it wasn't just an escape, it was the last hope for control over their futures. Frank Morris, John, and Clarence Anglin might have been desperate men, but in their minds, the escape represented their only shot at freedom. For the authorities who were involved in the investigation, the psychological toll was just as significant. The FBI's initial response to the escape was one of disbelief and shock. Alcatraz was supposed to be the inescapable prison. It was a place designed specifically to house the most dangerous and escape-prone criminals, far from the reach of the world outside. When Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers managed to escape, it shattered the public image of Alcatraz as an impenetrable fortress. This undermining of the system created a wave of uncertainty within the law enforcement community. For agents, detectives, and prison officials, the escape raised serious questions about their competence and ability to secure dangerous criminals. Investigators spent thousands of man-hours and resources trying to track down the escapees, but they were never able to solve the case. Many felt the psychological weight of the failure to catch them. For years, they grappled with the idea that they might never know the true fate of the men who escaped, and this haunting uncertainty left a lasting imprint on those involved. As time passed, the FBI and other agencies continued to re-examine their methods, trying to determine how the escape had been possible. The escape from Alcatraz became a cultural phenomenon almost immediately. It captured the public's imagination, fueling widespread fascination with the concept of prison escapes. The escape seemed to embody both defiance and mystery, and people from all walks of life were drawn into the case. Newspapers, television stations, and later, streaming platforms, continued to fuel the growing interest in the escape. For the public, the story of the escapees represented something both inspiring and terrifying. On one hand, there was admiration for the ingenuity and audacity of the escape itself. How could three men, against all odds, execute such a complex and daring plan? On the other hand, there was the fear of what it meant for society. Could criminals like Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers be living among us, hiding in plain sight? The idea that someone could escape from the seemingly inescapable and disappear without a trace both fascinated and unsettled the American public. Psychologically, the public's obsession with the Alcatraz escape reflects broader cultural fascinations with outlaws and escape artists. People are naturally drawn to stories that challenge the status quo, especially when those stories involve high stakes and risk. The idea of a perfect escape, where the criminals evade capture against all odds, speaks to a deeper yearning for freedom, rebellion, and the breaking of chains. As time went on, books and films began to reframe the escape in a more romanticized light. The narrative shifted from one of criminality to one of survival, with characters like Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers becoming folk heroes to some. In 1979, the Clint Eastwood film Escape from Alcatraz immortalized the escape as a tale of daring ingenuity. The film, which dramatized the escape, portrayed Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers as cunning and clever men who outwitted the system. This portrayal further cemented their place in pop culture as symbols of resistance against the oppression of the prison system. This romanticization of the escape did not just occur in Hollywood. Over the years, writers, documentarians, and journalists have continued to explore the escape, often presenting theories about the men's fate that range from them living free in another country to meeting tragic ends. The mystery of what happened to the escapees has become so ingrained in the public consciousness that it continues to be a source of discussion even today. The enduring mystery of the Alcatraz escape can also be viewed through the lens of psychological theories related to unresolved ambiguity. Humans have a natural tendency to seek closure. The inability to definitively solve a mystery, especially one as high-profile as this, creates an ongoing cognitive dissonance for those invested in a case. Psychologists suggest that this uncertainty creates a psychological paradox. The escape is so intriguing precisely because it has no clear ending. There is something inherently unsettling about not knowing whether Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers succeeded or failed. Our brains are wired to seek resolution, and the open-ended nature of this case leaves us in a constant state of wonder. One psychological theory that might explain the public's fascination is the need for closure. This theory argues that people have a fundamental desire to come to conclusions, particularly in ambiguous situations. The fact that the fate of the Alcatraz escapees is still unclear 60 years later means that people continue to speculate, discuss, and explore new theories. This desire for closure may be the psychological force behind the ongoing interest in the case and why the story is far from forgotten. The psychological impact of the Alcatraz escape is deep and multifaceted. For the escapees, it was an act of rebellion and survival, a desperate attempt to regain control over their lives. For law enforcement, it represented failure and a blow to the public's faith in the prison system. For the public, it became a symbol of defiance, mystery, and the enduring appeal of the escape artist. 6 decades later, the escape from Alcatraz continues to captivate minds around the world. The unanswered questions: did they survive? Were they helped? Did they live out their days in hiding? Remain as intriguing as ever. The psychological and cultural impact of the escape has ensured that it will be remembered not just as a historical event, but as a lasting part of American folklore. Over the years, countless investigators, armchair detectives, and even curious tourists have tried to unravel the mystery of what happened to Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. Despite numerous investigations and theories, the truth has remained elusive. However, as technology continues to evolve, so too does the possibility of uncovering new clues that could finally reveal the fate of the Alcatraz escapees. In this chapter, we explore how modern technology, from DNA analysis to digital forensics, is being used to revisit the case and what new insights might be gained from these advancements. One of the most significant developments in the search for the Alcatraz escapees is the potential use of DNA analysis. In the years following the escape, the FBI launched an intensive investigation, including combing through Alcatraz for any physical evidence that could lead to the capture of the escapees. Over time, however, the trail grew cold, and the investigation was officially closed in the 1970s. Fast forward to today, and DNA technology has advanced leaps and bounds. In 2003, the FBI reopened the case, this time focusing on DNA and forensic analysis. In the years that followed, forensic experts began analyzing old evidence that had been stored in the Bureau's archives, including personal items found in the escapees' cells. With new techniques, investigators began to hope that they could unlock answers to the mystery. In particular, DNA from hair or other bodily fluids found on objects like the escapees' makeshift raft, or even the raincoats they had used in the escape, could be analyzed for genetic material. Though no definitive DNA evidence has yet been recovered, experts argue that even a small sample could provide critical information. It is also possible that DNA analysis could help identify whether any of the men's relatives, who may have passed on their genetic traits, can be linked to the escapees, if any of them are alive. However, the challenge remains that Alcatraz was a prison designed for the highest security criminals. Any items that survived from the escape could have been tampered with, or potentially lost. Despite this, forensic experts remain hopeful that with new technologies, a breakthrough is possible. While DNA analysis is one frontier, another avenue for solving the mystery lies in the digital age. In the years since the escape, the world has seen a massive shift in how information is stored and analyzed. Today, data can be pulled from digital records, cell phone location tracking, and even social media interactions, tools that were not available in 1962. In recent years, advancements in digital forensics have made it possible to reconstruct old records and re-examine case files in ways that were once impossible. Investigators can now analyze public records, interviews, and old police files with a level of precision that wasn't available during the original investigation. One of the more interesting aspects of digital forensics is the ability to track individuals through various forms of media. In the case of the escapees, many have speculated that they may have used aliases after their escape, hiding in plain sight by assuming new identities. Today, investigators could trace the use of these false identities, looking at historical data such as Social Security records, passport applications, and even phone books to search for discrepancies or links to known associates of the escapees. Furthermore, the development of facial recognition software and comparison tools means that authorities could revisit old photographs from the time of the escape. Investigators could match these photos to any potential sightings of the men over the years, especially in places where they were rumored to have lived or visited. However, these advancements are not without their limitations. The escapees, if they indeed survived, would have had a lot of time to cover their tracks, and any documents they may have acquired would be harder to trace as the years have passed. Moreover, the potential for errors in matching people to photos or names remains an ongoing concern in digital forensics. Despite the lack of conclusive evidence, the Alcatraz case continues to attract new waves of investigators. Thanks to the power of the Internet, people from all over the world are contributing theories, databases, and even crowdsourced efforts to solve the mystery. Online forums and databases dedicated to criminal investigations have allowed people to collaborate in ways that were not possible before. One notable development has been the rise of cold case investigations on social media platforms. Investigators and amateur sleuths alike now have access to a wide array of tools and resources that can be used to revisit unsolved cases like the Alcatraz escape. Some online communities even crowdsource funds for further investigation, hoping to gather new evidence or hire private detectives to dig deeper. In recent years, some YouTubers and independent filmmakers have explored new theories regarding the escape. By using digital tools to piece together fragments of old police reports, witness statements, and other primary documents, they are shedding new light on details that were once overlooked. These efforts have even caught the attention of law enforcement, leading to renewed interest from both local and national authorities. While some of these efforts may seem like speculative exercises in entertainment, they also have the potential to uncover new leads. Technology, when combined with the right resources and mindset, could offer up valuable clues that might have been missed in the original investigation. Public interest in the case has never waned, and with new technology, the media's role in pushing the investigation forward is more influential than ever. As documentaries, podcasts, and feature films continue to be made about the Alcatraz escape, the public's appetite for more details and answers grows. In the digital age, media outlets are able to access data faster than ever before. News organizations now use algorithms to search for stories that could lead to breaking news or viral content, and the Alcatraz case has repeatedly made headlines. This renewed attention, combined with modern investigative tools, means that more resources are being allocated to old cold cases than ever before. The public's passion for solving the mystery of the Alcatraz escape has turned this case into something of a cultural phenomenon. It's not just an isolated incident in history, it's a symbol of our collective desire for answers to unresolved mysteries. This ongoing interest from the public has driven forward new developments in the case, and with technology improving by the day, it's not entirely out of the question that we might finally get answers. Ultimately, even with all the new technology and resources at our disposal, there is still no guarantee that we will ever know for certain what happened to Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. Their escape remains one of the greatest mysteries in American history. But the hope is there. With advances in forensic science, digital tracking, and the ever-growing role of the public in investigative efforts, there is still a chance that the truth will be uncovered. Whether through a breakthrough in DNA analysis, the discovery of new witnesses, or a lucky break in a long-forgotten file, the Alcatraz escape is still an open case. As the world continues to evolve, so too does the search for the escapees. One thing is clear. The story of the Alcatraz escape will not be easily forgotten, and the mystery may eventually be solved, one way or another. As the years pass, the search for Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers continues to evoke fascination. After decades of silence and an official declaration of their presumed deaths, new technologies, persistent curiosity, and public interest have breathed new life into the case. Could modern investigators still locate the escapees, or is this mystery destined to remain unsolved? In this chapter, we'll explore the ongoing efforts to track down the men, the challenges involved, and what the future might hold for the Alcatraz case. Despite the fact that the FBI officially closed the case in the 1970s, there has been a consistent push to reopen it. The case's high profile, the unanswered questions, and the persistent mystery surrounding the fate of the escapees has kept the door slightly ajar. As recent developments and advancements in technology have given new hope, a fresh generation of investigators, both professional and amateur, has taken up the mantle. In the early 2000s, several independent investigators, along with members of the public, began revisiting the case. Some were motivated by new DNA technology, others by the massive cultural impact that the escape has had on popular media. Documentaries, podcasts, and even online sleuthing communities began popping up, with the goal of examining new pieces of evidence that may have been overlooked or left behind. These modern investigators have access to more sophisticated methods than ever before, and they are committed to resolving the mystery once and for all. Perhaps most notably, a group of former FBI agents and private investigators from the United States have worked on new theories in recent years, combining modern investigative techniques with the old case files. They have managed to track down new witnesses, examine overlooked materials, and reanalyze decades-old evidence. Whether any of their new findings will lead to the identification or even the reappearance of the escapees remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, interest in the case is at an all-time high, and the mystery shows no signs of fading away. The road to finding Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers is not without its obstacles. One of the most significant challenges investigators face is the sheer amount of time that has passed. After more than 60 years, the escapees, if they are still alive, would be in their 80s or even older. Any attempt to track them down now is complicated by the passage of time. Many of the witnesses who might have had knowledge of their whereabouts or their post-escape lives are either deceased or difficult to reach. Additionally, any evidence left behind by the escapees is highly subject to decay. The makeshift raft, the raincoats, and the notes they left behind could have been destroyed or severely damaged over time. What once seemed like potential leads now seems more like pieces of a distant puzzle, scattered in the sands of time. Even if physical evidence were discovered, it may be too degraded to provide any conclusive answers. The most frustrating part of this is that while new technologies are helping to investigate the case, there are still many unknowns. For instance, many theories suggest that the escapees could have used false identities to integrate into society post-escape, but tracking the movements of people who may have lived under fake names for decades is an incredibly difficult task. Many records are no longer accessible, and the authorities have had to rely on the tiny scraps of information that might still remain in obscure corners of society. The people who helped them, if they did indeed have help, would also have gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. After all, aiding criminals in escaping from Alcatraz is a crime in itself, and anyone who might have been involved would have a strong incentive to stay hidden. One of the most intriguing new directions in the search for the escapees involves revisiting the possible locations where they may have sought refuge after fleeing Alcatraz. In the years since their escape, several theories have been proposed about where they might have gone, and many of these theories continue to gain traction. Several reports claim that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers might have escaped to the remote hills of Northern California or even crossed the border into Mexico. Some believe that they had the help of local accomplices who provided them with shelter, transportation, and new identities. Others suggest that they may have made it as far as Canada or another part of the world, blending into the anonymity of a larger population. Some of the more compelling new theories involve the idea that the escapees may have lived in plain sight. With modern technology enabling facial recognition software to identify people in old photographs and documents, it's possible that new images of individuals matching the descriptions of Morris and the Anglins could surface in social media or historical archives. A large portion of people who were involved in organized crime during the era have also been tracked down posthumously as technology has improved, and new details continue to emerge, often years after the fact. Furthermore, new witnesses who may have information about the escapees' whereabouts or post-escape lives have occasionally emerged. Many former prison guards and residents of nearby towns have come forward with claims of seeing the escapees or knowing people who may have been involved. However, none of these stories have been definitively verified. In a case this old, sifting through fact and fiction can be an especially difficult task. As we discussed in Chapter 19, the potential for DNA testing to reveal the truth about the Alcatraz escapees has grown significantly. New techniques such as genealogical DNA testing have allowed authorities to trace distant relatives and uncover previously unknown family connections. While no direct DNA evidence from the escapees has been found yet, it is not outside the realm of possibility that a breakthrough in this field could be the key to solving the case. Moreover, forensic investigators are revisiting the DNA samples taken from items at Alcatraz, including the makeshift raft and raincoats that were left behind. These pieces could hold crucial genetic information, especially if the escapees were able to leave behind trace amounts of DNA. In the future, forensic teams will continue to test these materials with increasingly advanced tools. In addition to DNA, advanced facial recognition software has the potential to match old photos of the escapees to those taken in the years following their escape. Though it's been decades, new technological improvements could allow authorities to cross-reference images and find similarities between the Alcatraz escapees and individuals living under new identities. Despite the progress in technology and investigative techniques, finding Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers remains an incredibly daunting task. It's possible that they have died, that they are living under new identities, or that they simply vanished into history, never to be seen again. However, the search continues. Every year, there are new reports, new theories, and new pieces of evidence. Whether it's through the tireless work of law enforcement or the efforts of citizen sleuths, the case of the Alcatraz escape will continue to inspire people to dig deeper and ask questions. As modern investigative techniques improve and more people join the search, the chances of solving the mystery may increase. But no matter the outcome, the story of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers will remain one of the most captivating and enduring mysteries in American criminal history. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?